Chapter 4972. That year was the worst year Su Mu had ever experienced. When she was 8 months pregnant, she was still washing dishes in a small restaurant to earn money to go to the hospital to give birth to Cymbidium chinense. That winter, her hand split open and it was very painful. It was so painful that she wanted to cry, but thinking about the cost of giving birth and living expenses, she worked hard to save money. For 10 months, she worked hard to live frugally, lived in the worst house, and gave birth to Cymbidium chinense. The 20,000 yuan she saved allowed her to get through the difficult days. Even when she was pregnant, she didn't even have a year of maternity clothes. They were all given to her by the kind people next door. When she was pregnant with Cymbidium chinense, she repeatedly told the doctor to reduce the number of checkups, as long as the child was healthy. At first, the doctor didn't agree. Later, when he found out that she was pregnant before marriage, he sighed and lowered the examination fee from more than 3,000 yuan to about 1,000 yuan. Su Mu was very thin. Originally, it was not suitable for natural childbirth, but she said she wanted to give it a try. She was so thin, so small, and more than 9 months pregnant, she still looked like she was malnourished. However, even when she was lying in the delivery room like that, the doctor was surprised, she was too strong. Under such conditions, she actually gave birth smoothly. In fact, it was not that she was strong, but if it did not go smoothly, she would have to undergo surgery, and she would have to pay a few thousand yuan more. In addition, she could not take care of the child. She was alone. She gave birth to the child, and her mother did not come to see her. Her father secretly came once. He had no money, and only put 500 yuan next to the pillow, saying that it was to buy some food for the child. After Father Su left, Su Mu cried for a long time. She knew that it would be difficult in the future, but she never regretted giving birth to Cymbidium chinense. Not even for a moment. She was very thrifty, and she saved everything, but she always chose better and more practical things for Cymbidium chinense. When Cymbidium chinense was 2 months old, she took on a manual job because the sister next door introduced her to her. If she worked 6 to 7 hours a day, she could earn a little more than 1,000 yuan a month. It wasn't much, but she could still get by if she saved a little. There had always been 10,000 yuan in her bank account, but when she was in Cymbidium chinense for 6 months, she had spent it all due to pneumonia, and it was not enough at all. She was the one who begged the attending doctor for conservative treatment. As for her, she stayed in the hospital for 6 days and 6 nights without a wink of sleep. At that time, the situation was critical, and Su Mu was about to go crazy. If anything happened to Cymbidium chinense, then her life would be completely dark. She would even doubt if she was wrong. But that morning, Cymbidium chinense woke up. He stared at Su Mu with his big, bright eyes. He could not speak yet, but he could smile. He grinned. He wasn't well nourished, so he didn't have any teeth. When he smiled, his gums were exposed, and he looked extremely cute. At that moment, Su Mu smiled with tears streaming down her face. She had been redeemed. Cymbidium chinense slowly fell asleep, and Su Mu accompanied him. It was quiet all around. Perhaps it was because this was a villa, and it was much quieter than the old apartment in the city. Su Mu sat and accompanied Cymbidium chinense. She couldn't look at him every day in the future, but she was willing to look at him every day. At about 9:30 a.m., the door opened. Yi Xiangnan had already taken a shower and was wearing a white bathrobe. He frowned and looked at her. "Why aren't you done yet?" Su Mu sat there without moving. "I'll sleep here." He walked over and unexpectedly hugged her from behind. He even touched her hair with his chin. "Didn't we agree?" Su Mu was a little annoyed. She had been tricked by him today, and now he was making such a request of her. Chapter 4973. Updated quickly, Sumu was a little annoyed and spoke without thinking. She instinctively wanted to punch and kick Yi Xiannan, but the difference in strength between a man and a woman was so clear. Her little bit of strength was practically all show and no substance. Yi Xiannan easily restrained her. Yi Xiangnan, I've never seen a man as shameless as you. Sumu gritted her teeth. He scoffed coldly and said unhappily, I've never seen a woman as stubborn as you. You want to attract the servants, alarm my parents, and then rush over in the middle of the night. He was really shameless, but Yi Xiangnan didn't think that he was that shameless, because they had registered their marriage, and she was his wife now. She was the one who was too much. She didn't let him interact with other women, and she was giving him the cold shoulder. What kind of logic was that? But in the end, he was really afraid that his parents would be alarmed, and that wouldn't be good. He was naturally in a bad mood, and he slammed the door hard. Sumu lay quietly for a while, then suddenly got up, rushed to the door, and locked it from the inside. She took a deep breath and let out a long breath. She didn't feel that she was his wife, but he felt that she was. He was really arrogant. Leaning against the door, she didn't even dare to go out, afraid that he would change his mind again. She didn't know why he wanted to be married to her with her average looks. There were many women waiting for him outside, weren't there? After the struggle just now, she could barely stand, and her body slowly slid down. She simply sat on the carpet and spaced out for a while. After a long time, she went to the bathroom to take a shower and found a shirt from Yi Xiangnan as her pajamas. She thought that she wouldn't be able to sleep, but she didn't know how she fell asleep the moment she laid down. Sumu had a dream that night. She dreamed of Shen Wenxuan, dreamed of the past, and dreamed of Yi Xiangnan, dreamed that he was going to have another child with her. When she woke up, the sky was already bright, and even the sun shone in. It was quite comfortable when it shone on him. The sun was warm and comfortable. Sumu buried her face in the pillow and almost didn't want to wake up. The pillow was very soft, the bedsheet was very comfortable, and everything was very comfortable. There was also that faint masculine scent, which made one feel at ease just by smelling it. Male breath. She abruptly opened her eyes and was faced with Yi Xiangnan's enlarged handsome face. Sumu reached out and touched her face. He seemed to have kissed her face. Wait, how did he get in? How did he get in? Yi Xiangnan straightened his body, crossed his arms in front of him, and leaned against the bedside table, sizing her up. What's the matter? You tried so hard to chase me out last night, and now you're wearing my shirt. Sumu, isn't that a good rule? Sumu bit her lip. I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know. Yi Xiangnan was not in a hurry to leave. He watched how she got up from the bed. She was probably only wearing his shirt. He was so bad. Sumu pursed her lips. Get out. This is my room. Why do I have to go out? Yi Xiangnan bent down slightly and said with a chuckle, but you, why are you staying here, huh? He even gently touched her hair, and his voice unconsciously became hoarse. Or, do all women say one thing and mean another? You're the one who says one thing and means another. Sumu bit her lip and hit him with a pillow. Get out. I'm getting up. Go to sleep. You don't seem to have anything to do today. I'll send Cymbidium Chinense home. He didn't make things difficult for her because Cymbidium Chinense was going to school and he didn't have time to waste with her. Yi Xiangnan left and went downstairs briskly. Last night wasn't pleasant, but for some reason, Yi Xiangnan wasn't in a bad mood. When he went downstairs, Cymbidium Chinense had already finished his breakfast and was sitting there obediently. Seeing Yi Xiangnan coming down, Cymbidium Chinense immediately stood up. Dad. His gaze drifted up the stairs. Yi Xiangnan knew what he wanted to ask. He smiled faintly. Mom hasn't gotten up yet. Dad will send you to the nursery. Cymbidium chinense carried a small school bag and looked very energetic and happy. Yi Xiangnan looked at the little guy and was in a good mood. A successful man, didn't he say that he had power, wealth, a wife, and a child? He had them all now. He took Cymbidium chinense to the car and fastened the seatbelt for him. Before leaving, he turned his head. Let's go now. Cymbidium chinense grunted. Let's go. Yi Xiangnan drove his son all the way to the nursery with his sunglasses on. He got off the car with Cymbidium chinense in his arms. Usually, he said that he shouldn't spoil him too much. But now, he kissed him reluctantly. Dad will pick you up tonight. Can you stay at Dad's place tonight? Cymbidium chinense's eyes widened. Dad, what about Mom? Will she stay with us? I think so. Yi Xiangnan pinched his son's nose. She won't be able to reject Cymbidium chinense. After saying that, he smiled. All right, let's go in. Cymbidium chinense nodded obediently and ran all the way in. At the door of the nursery, the middle-aged female teacher touched his head lovingly. Then, she greeted Yi Xiangnan from afar. Yi Xiangnan smiled faintly. The female teachers blushed. After all, President Yi was a good-looking young master from a wealthy family. The kind that young and old liked. Yi Xiangnan got into the car and left. He didn't know that the matter of him and Sumu getting their marriage certificate on the day the child went to school had become a school legend. Rumors were quite shameful. Yi Xiangnan didn't care about these things. He held the steering wheel with both hands. He was going to go straight to the company. He still had an important morning meeting this morning. But when the car was halfway there, he turned around and went back to his villa. He wanted to see if Sumu was still there. Auntie Chen was surprised to see his car driving back. Sir, why are you back again? Yi Xiangnan parked the car and jumped out. I forgot something. He walked upstairs. As he walked, he seemed to have thought of something and asked casually, by the way, has Sumu woken up? Auntie Chen finally got the point. She coughed lightly. Miss Su left a long time ago. Yi Xiangnan stopped and turned his head. His expression didn't look good. Left? So soon. He stood on the stairs and asked softly, did she have breakfast? Auntie Chen replied calmly, how could she not entertain her? No matter what, she still ate. She's going back now. This woman is really... Yi Xiangnan was a little speechless. Couldn't she just live her life peacefully? Why did she have to do these things? He let out a long sigh and didn't say anything else. He went straight downstairs and prepared to go to the company. Auntie Chen didn't get it for a moment. She asked casually, Sir, you haven't taken your things yet. Yi Xiangnan was stunned. He said calmly, I don't think I forgot. So Auntie Chen thought that this forgotten thing was probably Miss Su. It was quite important. The previous chapter was just released and it's already full. If I release it and cut off a part of it, there's still one more chapter. Mwah. Chapter 4974. Auntie Chen understood that the thing she forgot was probably Miss Su. He took her seriously. In fact, although Miss Su looked ordinary, she was not ugly. Besides, she looked pretty after dressing up that day. She was very thin. Wasn't it popular to be thin now? Maybe Mr. Yi liked Miss Su's figure. Yes, he must like her figure. Yi Xiangnan got in the car. When he started the car, Secretary Li called. Secretary Li's voice was as sweet as ever, but Yi Xiangnan's voice was not so calm. What's the matter? According to Secretary Li's experience, CEO Ye's bad mood probably had something to do with women. There was an 80% chance that the newly appointed Madame Yi was not to his liking. It was true that a melon forcibly picked would not be sweet. Didn't CEO Yi know this? Now that they got their marriage certificate, he forced them to live together. Wasn't that forcing them to live together? Anyway, if it were her, she wouldn't be willing. Secretary Li's voice became softer and sweeter. She smiled. CEO Yi, there is a morning meeting this morning. Besides, the overseas manager Lin also came back to report. She has to fly in the afternoon. Yi Xiangnan pulled his tie. Reschedule the morning meeting to the afternoon. Secretary Li's voice was sweet and emotionless. But Manager Lin has to fly in the afternoon. Yi Xiangnan was in a bad mood. Am I the only one in the company? Secretary Li knew it was not good, so she said in a low voice, there are several vice presidents. Yi Xiangnan said emotionlessly, then let her talk to them separately. Then we can discuss in groups. I just want the result. Secretary Li heard that. How overbearing was he? How much did he look down on Manager Lin? How did Manager Lin offend CEO Yi? Didn't CEO Yi treat Manager Lin well in the past? He changed so suddenly. This man was really a pig trotter. Secretary Li hung up the phone and went to talk to Lin Lu. She didn't like Lin Lu to begin with, so of course she wouldn't beautify it. She bluntly repeated Yi Xiannan's words. Lin Lu's meticulously made-up face was a little disappointed and even a little angry. She thought that she would be able to see Yi Xiangnan today and explain what happened yesterday to him. She wanted to behave appropriately and win against Sumu, but Yi Xiangnan did not give her the chance at all. Lin Lu was especially annoyed. She bit her lip and didn't say anything for a long time. Secretary Li coughed lightly. Manager Lin, a few vice presidents are still waiting for you. Lin Lu was stalling for time. She was unwilling to go. She couldn't take this lying down. After half an hour, Secretary Li came to her temporary office and told her that Boss Yi was here and asked her to report to him. Lin Lu felt that she didn't wear this dress in vain. She immediately went to Yi Xiangnan's office. She always thought that there would be some private space. However, apart from Yi Xiangnan, there was also a vice president and Secretary Li. Moreover, she didn't directly report to Yi Xiangnan. He just listened. The vice president was not polite to her. He pointed out some bad things directly. Because of his high position, his voice was strict. Yi Xiangnan didn't blame her. He did everything according to the rules. After the report, Lin Lu hid in the toilet and cried bitterly. Secretary Li heard it from outside and sighed again. Men were all pig trotters. How much confidence did Lin Lu have in herself? A man like Boss Yi had seen all kinds of women. Chapter 4975. Secretary Li sighed while washing her hands. When Lin Lu came out, her eyes were red. Secretary Li just looked at her and didn't say anything. After washing her hands, she left. Lin Lu knew that this woman must be going to the company to promote her affairs. She gritted her teeth, but couldn't do anything to Secretary Li. Lin Lu had been in the workplace for a long time, so she had some self-awareness. Although Secretary Li was just a secretary, she was absolutely more important than herself in CEO Ye's heart. An overseas director could be trained at any time, but a suitable secretary was not always available. Especially this secretary and CEO Yi were in cahoots. Lin Lu knew it too well, so she didn't dare to do anything even though she was angry. She just went to the overseas department to vent her anger, but she didn't know that the women there were not to be trifled with. They knew that she was transferred overseas, so they were secretly demoted. In fact, she didn't have much face in front of CEO Yi. If she really cared about the overseas department, she would have done it every day. Besides, CEO Yi just got his marriage certificate yesterday. He was a big shot, so the family was the most important. Rich families were always like that. Lin Lu didn't vent her anger, but she had a belly full of anger, which was very uncomfortable. But she still had to fly in the afternoon. Before the flight, Lin Lu held her phone in the VIP lounge, wanting to call Yi Xiangnan. But in the end, she held the phone for a few minutes and didn't dare to make the call. When the plane was about to take off, she got on the plane. At the headquarters of Starlight, everyone knew that CEO Yi was in a bad mood. Everyone felt strange. Didn't he just give out sweets yesterday? Why did his face turn black now? Secretary Li had always been the focus of the cultural export of Starlight. From what she heard, everyone in Starlight knew that the new Mrs. Yi didn't like CEO Yi. Alas, they sighed at Su Mu's ignorance. This was the dream of many women. Didn't she know CEO Yi's assets? But on the other hand, everyone admired her very much. How much courage did it take to refuse CEO Yi and this overwhelming wealth? If it were them, CEO Yi could do whatever he wanted. Self-esteem, it was nothing. In his office, Yi Xiangnan was in a bad mood. The afternoon meeting was even worse, and the atmosphere of Starlight was even more depressed. Secretary Li, who was in charge of communication and culture, was also criticized by CEO Yi. Secretary Li also felt wronged. She had tried her best to control her mouth. But she couldn't be blamed. However, when his boss was in a bad mood, not only did Secretary Li empathize with him, but he also had a hard time. In fact, Secretary Li didn't know why CEO Li was so. In fact, Secretary Li didn't know how Miss Su had captivated CEO Yi. It couldn't be said that he liked her very much. He just wanted to conquer her. As a woman, she had sympathy. But she was a secretary. CEO Yi had just given her a red packet, so she had to share her burden. Therefore, Secretary Li looked at CEO Yi and coughed softly. CEO Yi, you just got your marriage certificate. Is there anything else you haven't done? For example, you haven't signed any agreements. Secretary Li looked at CEO Yi and coughed. Didn't you sign the prenuptial agreement last time? But it was invalid. Do you need to sign it again? Secretary Li blinked. Didn't we sign a prenuptial agreement the last time? But it was voided. Now that we have our marriage certificate, shouldn't we sign it again? Chapter 4976. Not bad. Yi Xiangnan put down the pen in his hand. I forgot about the prenuptial agreement. It's time to prepare it. Secretary Li thought to herself that CEO Yi must be forgetful to forget about it. It was said that beauties hurt the country, but Miss Su wasn't that beautiful either. However, Miss Su had a good temperament when she dressed up. A rare good temperament. Temperament was very picky. Some women might not have temperament even after cultivating for a lifetime, but some people were born with it. Su Mu was obviously one of them. God didn't give her a good appearance, but he gave her temperament. This could be considered as compensation. Secretary Li was clear about it. She also felt that Su Mu was very clear-headed. For a man like CEO Yi, he didn't have a woman except for Qin Yi Huan in the past 30 years. He was also sincere to Qin Yi Huan. However, they didn't get married. His sincerity was fed to the dogs. It didn't matter anymore. At this time, he was just curious about Su Mu and conquered her. He didn't like her that much. As soon as Secretary Li said this, Yi Xiannan echoed. Secretary Li smiled. CEO Yi, I'll inform Lawyer Qin to prepare the documents. Yi Xiangnan nodded. He was going to call Sumu himself. But Secretary Li suddenly thought of something. By the way, CEO Yi, Lawyer Qin didn't come to the company this morning because he didn't feel well. Is Mr. Qin okay? Yi Xiangnan was quite concerned. Lawyer Qin was not only the senior of the company, but also his elder. Mr. Qin had a good relationship with his grandfather. Secretary Li smiled. I've called him. It's just a common cold with a low fever. He should be fine. Yi Xiangnan was relieved. Then he flipped through the documents in his hand. Then let Lawyer Qin come. He hasn't quit yet, right? Secretary Li secretly rolled her eyes. Wasn't CEO Yi a little too much? However, Yi Xiangnan didn't think that he was going overboard. He felt that it was reasonable. Of course, he had to see his wife. Of course, he wouldn't be happy if she had an ambiguous relationship with Shen Liangchuan. Taking advantage of this opportunity, he made the two of them give up completely. Secretary Li went out to handle the matter, while he casually called Sumu and asked her to come to the company to sign something. It was related to the shares of Stars Entertainment. Sumu wanted to avoid arousing suspicion. He had long known her bad temper, so he was not afraid that she would not come. Sure enough, as soon as he said that, Sumu said that she would come over in a while. After making the call, Yi Xiangnan was in a great mood. He even went up and down the building to inspect it. The whole starry sky could be seen. CEO Yi was in a good mood. Secretary Li knew that she wanted to relieve CEO Yi's boredom, but she didn't want to offend Sumu. How could she watch the scene later? Even a blind person could see that Lawyer Shen and Sumu hadn't forgotten each other. They still wanted to sign something like that on the same occasion. Secretary Li went to inform them. Sure enough, Lawyer Shen's eyes were filled with a deep look. After a moment, he just smiled faintly. Sure enough, CEO Yi always does whatever he wants. Only if he didn't consider a person's feelings would he be like this. If it were him, he wouldn't be willing. What Yi Xiangnan wanted was not Sumu's love, but to yield, or to see Sumu happy. It was quite childish. But at the same time, it was quite selfish. As for love, there was absolutely no such thing. Chapter 4977. Secretary Li sighed. Lawyer Shen, is there any problem here? If you don't want to go, you can just say that you are sick and ask for leave. There are so many lawyers in Stars Entertainment. There must be someone who can do it. In fact, it was just a formality. With Sumu's temper, she probably wouldn't look at the whole Stars Entertainment even if it was put in front of her. Secretary Li heard that when Yuan liked Sumu very much, probably because of this. In any case, she would never be able to treat money as dirt like that. After she finished speaking, Shen Wenxuan shook his head. I'll go. It was embarrassing for Sumu. Besides, Yi Xiangnan was targeting him. If he couldn't do it today, he would let him know that Sumu was Yi Xiangnan's wife in the future. There would be such a day, but not today. There would always be someone who would see Sumu sign, not as good as him. Shen Wenxuan continued to work and said calmly, if Sumu comes, just call me on the inside. He still calls her Sumu and still doesn't want to call her Mrs. Yi. Why should he talk about it when Sumu didn't want to admit her identity? Secretary Li felt sorry for Lawyer Shen, so she coughed softly. Lawyer Shen, I'm going out. I'll call you later. Shen Wenxuan looked up and smiled, watching the popular person beside Yi Xiangnan leave. Yes, she was a popular person. Secretary Li had her own merits to be able to stay with the bad-tempered CEO Yi. It wasn't that she was charming, but they were birds of a feather. Secretary Li returned to her office, poured a cup of herbal tea, and drank a big cup. The second secretary came over and whispered, "What's wrong? Did CEO Yi scold you, Sister Li?" Secretary Li glanced at her. "Little girl, am I such a blind person? Can't you see that CEO Yi is in a good mood now?" "That's true." The second secretary muttered to herself and then asked, "Sister Li, what method did you use? CEO Yi is super hard to please. I haven't seen him smile in the past 6 months." Secretary Li rolled her eyes. "Coax? Only a woman like Lin Lu needs to coax CEO Yi. I'm doing what he likes." The second secretary was quite interested and asked her how she could cater to his taste. The content was a little dirty. Secretary Li was a little annoyed. "That's a little harsh. It's better not to mention it. Anyway, CEO Yi is happy, but someone is unhappy. In the future, Sumu would not let her off easily. God knows how hard it is to be a secretary." Sandwich biscuits. After more than half an hour, Sumu arrived. Secretary Li received her and asked the second secretary to inform Lawyer Shen that Miss Su had arrived. 10 minutes later, Shen Wenxuan and Sumu met in Yi Xiangnan's office. The scene was rather awkward. Neither of them spoke much. Yi Xiangnan, on the other hand, was in a good mood. After last night, Sumu was very disgusted with him and ran away early in the morning. Now she was also very unwilling to see him, and she did not expect that he would ask Shen Wenxuan to do this. Sumu didn't come here to sign. She came here to explain. "Mr. Yi, Cymbidium Chinense has gone to school. If it's convenient for you here, we can renew the certificate today," she said in a kind voice. In order to go to school with Cymbidium Chinense, she became a second marriage. Although she had a child, her reputation had long been ruined. Yi Xiangnan sat on the sofa and said lightly, "It's not very convenient. In addition to the nursery, there are primary schools, middle schools and universities. All of them need a household register." Chapter 4978. Sumu was furious. He was a scoundrel. She didn't understand his intentions before, but it was clear after last night. Sumu pursed her lips and said softly, "You will get married in the future. Aren't we married already? Are you going to push me to someone else?" Yi Xiangnan smiled frivolously and deliberately teased her. Seeing that she couldn't say a word in front of Shen Wenxuan, he was in a good mood. So what if it was his first love? She was his wife now. How could Shen Wenxuan say a word that their marriage was fake? Shen Wenxuan was in the legal team, so he knew that the words on the marriage certificate were the most real. It was much better than first love. Only an idiot like Sumu would believe that a nursery would ask for a marriage certificate. Did the Yi family have to use a marriage certificate to choose which school they wanted to attend? After Yi Xiangnan finished speaking, Sumu couldn't take it anymore. It didn't matter if she was embarrassed, but there was no need for Shen Wenxuan to accompany her. Shen Wenxuan worked at Stars Entertainment, and everyone in Stars Entertainment knew about her, Yi Xiangnan, and him. She didn't want Shen Wenxuan to be criticized because of her. She had already let him down when she left without saying goodbye. She didn't want to embarrass him again. Now that Yi Xiangnan wanted to sign it, she would sign it. Sumu took the pen and pursed her lips. "Where do you want me to sign?" "I'll sign it." Yi Xiangnan's gaze fell on her face. After a while, he smiled and said, "You have a backbone. Sign all the documents here. Lawyer Shen will do it after you sign it." Sumu glanced at him, but didn't dare to look at Shen Wenxuan. She lowered her head, turned the pages one by one, and signed her name. She wrote very quickly, as if she didn't want to read a word clearly. Actually, one more marriage certificate wouldn't affect her much. She didn't want to get married for the time being. In her heart, she was sure that Yi Xiangnan would want to get married one day. If he got tired of it and didn't want to play anymore, he would naturally let her go. She still knew what Su Mu looked like. After signing, Su Mu looked up. Are you satisfied? His attitude is not very good. Yi Xiangnan said in a dignified manner. He said to Shen Wenxuan politely, Lawyer Qin isn't feeling well, so I'll leave the legal team's matters to you. Also, go visit Lawyer Chen after work. He's your teacher after all, and he takes good care of you. He thought for a moment and suddenly said, also, Lawyer Chen will be retiring next year. I hope that you will take over the legal team. The annual salary will satisfy you. Think about it. Shen Wenxuan smiles faintly. I will consider it, Boss Yi. He took the documents and got up to leave. But when he opened the door, he turned to look at Su Mu. Su Mu lowered her eyes and didn't speak. She didn't want to embarrass him in the company. After the door was closed, Su Mu looked at the door and was a little lost in thought. Yi Xiangnan went to the wine cabinet and poured himself a glass of brandy. He took a sip and then smiled. Don't look at her anymore. She has left. If you want to see her, I can arrange a position for you in the company. You can see her every day if you come here every day. Su Mu felt that he was boring and turned her head. Mr. Yi doesn't seem to say such sour words. Yi Xiangnan smiled again and put down the glass in his hand. He walked over and put his hands on both sides of the sofa. Such a distance made her a little uneasy. Yi Xiangnan, what do you want to do? He still had a careless smile on his face as he reached out and hooked her chin with his slender fingers. Chapter 49-79. 1 second to remember. He still had a casual smile, stretched out his slender and good-looking fingers to hook her chin, as if he was teasing a little pet. Are you still angry about what happened last night? Didn't you kick me out? Why are you still angry? Su Mu stared at him. Last night was indeed a bad experience. Yi Xiangnan maintained this, with a slight smile on his noble and good-looking face. Suddenly, he seemed to think of something. Oh, did you just say I was jealous? Mrs. Yi, you're right. I'm jealous of Shen Wenxuan. How do you feel when I express it so straightforwardly? He teased her, feeling that it was quite fun. Recently, the crisis of Starlight Entertainment had passed. Under his pressure, his subordinates worked hard to improve their performance. Now Starlight Entertainment was thriving, so he was in the mood to have fun. Su Mu was now his greatest pleasure. Su Mu was trapped by him and couldn't get up, so she could only stare at him. He was really hateful, and she didn't like him. Yes, he was powerful, rich, and very good-looking, but these had nothing to do with her. The only thing she had to do with him was Cymbidium chinense. Su Mu's face didn't look good. She didn't give him face and said very directly, I am not your Mrs. Yi. Mr. Yi, you have mistaken me for someone else. According to the civil law, there are many obligations between husband and wife. Should we let Lawyer Shen from our legal team read it to Mrs. Yi? He whispered in her ear, and at last, he even chuckled. Very hateful. Su Mu felt that she was fooled again. She was like a little bug in Yi Xiangnan's hand. If he wanted her to be unable to struggle, she could not struggle. If he wanted to pinch her to death, he could pinch her to death. She looked up. Let me go. I don't want to. Yi Xiangnan stared at her, his eyes suddenly darkening. He looked like he was going to kiss her. Su Mu turned her face to the side, feeling a little embarrassed and angry. Yi Xiangnan, did you call me here just to tease me? Other than teasing, there are other reasons. He didn't mind. At this moment, the door suddenly opened. Secretary Li was holding a stack of documents for CEO Yi to sign, but what did she see? CEO Yi and Mrs. Yi were, well, one-sidedly cultivating their relationship. Secretary Li swallows hard. I'm sorry, Boss Yi. Please continue. With that, he closed the door. Yi Xiangnan didn't look well. He looked back at Su Mu and found that Su Mu's expression was even worse than his. Hence, he was in a good mood. He chuckled lightly. Why? Are you unhappy? Su Mu pushed him away. I'm leaving. Yi Xiangnan, you're so boring. Just as she was about to leave, he suddenly grabbed her arm. With a fling, she fell on the sofa. Nothing happened as she expected. He just took the bottle of brandy and poured a few glasses into her mouth. Su Mu's alcohol tolerance wasn't very good. She fell asleep after a few glasses. Her alcohol tolerance wasn't bad. Yi Xiangnan sat on the sofa beside her and touched her face with his fingers. Her face was a little hot. It was because of the alcohol. He said in a low voice, if I didn't talk about you, you wouldn't be able to leave. At this moment, Su Mu's phone rang. He looked at it and saw that it was his mother calling. He picked it up. Mom, it's Xiangnan. Are you looking for Su Mu? Chapter 4980. Updated quickly, when Yuan was a little stunned. Why are you the one answering the phone? Is Su Mu with you? Tell her not to forget to register in the afternoon. I've already talked to the Sun daily. Yi Xiangnan paused for a moment before saying calmly, something happened to Su Mu here. What happened? When Yuan was quite concerned and said hurriedly, don't bully her. It's not easy for Su Mu to give birth to a child alone. When Yuan didn't ask about it, but the Su family was like that, so he could imagine what kind of situation it was. This was also what he admired about Su Mu, she didn't act pitiful and was quite independent. After when Yuan said that, Yi Xiangnan coughed lightly. I didn't really bully her. I just made her drink some alcohol. Su Mu is asleep now, and I don't know when she'll wake up. When Yuan heard that, he was furious. Yi Xiangnan, isn't this bullying? Don't use the methods you use on other women on Su Mu. She's your wife, the mother of Cymbidium chinense, isn't she? Is this how you usually treat Cymbidium chinense mother? Saying that, she asked again, where are you guys? It was already so late. They couldn't still be in the villa, could they? Yi Xiangnan knew that his mother was overthinking things, but it was normal for her to overthink things. He told the truth. At the office. All right, Mom, just tell them that Su Mu has something to do and will be there tomorrow morning. She was already drunk and might not wake up in the afternoon. It was better to tell them in advance than at the last minute. When Yuan couldn't do anything about it. He warned him again and again before hanging up. Yi Xiangnan looked at his phone and switched it off. Then, he carried Su Mu to the lounge. Of course, he wouldn't take advantage of her. What was the point of that? After putting Su Mu down, he went back to his office. There was a group meeting at 10:30 in the morning, which was only held by the top executives of the company. It was discussed on the sofa in Yi Xiangnan's office. President Yi didn't say that Mrs. Yi was in the lounge, so the group meeting went on until 2 in the afternoon. Su Mu woke up. She sat on the bed in the lounge, feeling a little dizzy. She looked around and couldn't remember what had happened, but she still stood up shakily. She didn't know where her shoes were, so she could only walk barefoot on the soft carpet. The carpet absorbed the sound of her footsteps, so the men who were discussing business did not notice. Yi Xiang, on the other hand, turned around and saw Su Mu. He frowned and looked at her bare feet. Then he said in a low voice, "Go in first." Su Mu was stunned for a moment. Then she found that it was Yi Xiangnan's office. He was not alone. He was in a meeting. Those top executives all heard that President Yi had gotten married. They didn't care about it at first, but now they saw that the couple was very loving. President Yi even let Mrs. Yi sleep in his office. How loving they were. Everyone had a warm smile on their faces. Yi Xiangnan was a man. He naturally knew what they were thinking. He was a little unhappy and signaled them to leave. After they left, Su Mu was still standing at the door of the lounge. He wanted to scold her, but when he walked over, he found that Su Mu didn't wake up at all. She was still drunk. With a sigh, Yi Xiangnan reached out and touched her face. It was still very hot. Was the alcohol still there? But soon, he felt that something was wrong. It was unusually hot. Chapter 4981. Without a second thought, Yi Xiannan placed her hand on her forehead, and then her expression turned a little ugly. Damn it, she had a fever. He looked at her helplessly. Su Mu looked at him as if she was unconscious. Didn't she feel uncomfortable with the fever? At least he saw that her eyes were covered with a layer of mist, and she looked quite silly. How can she drink so much? He murmured, then picked her up and wanted to take her back to the lounge, but Su Mu didn't want to and struggled. Yi Xiangnan had to put her on the sofa in front of the French window and sat down. He went to press an internal line and said, "Secretary Li, call the doctor over." Secretary Li was a little surprised. Who was sick? What did CEO Yi do? Yi Xiangnan hung up the phone, took a cup, and poured a cup of hot water for Su Mu. He put it in her hand and said, "Drink a little." He felt that it was quite troublesome. If he had known that she would have a fever, he probably wouldn't have fed her alcohol. Now that it was like this, he couldn't throw her out, so he could only take care of her. Su Mu held the cup, but didn't drink it. Her eyes were a little straight. "The doctor will come in a while," he said calmly. Su Mu put down the cup, turned around, and lay on the back of the sofa, her chin resting on the back of her hand. She looked outside quietly. Yi Xiangnan didn't know what she was thinking, and whether she had sobered up or not. But now that she was sick, he wouldn't torture her. He let her be in a daze, and he went to deal with work. After a while, a very soft voice came from the sofa. "I'm hungry." He looked up, a little surprised, and then he couldn't help but laugh. He pressed the internal line again and said, "Secretary Li, prepare 2 dishes. Make it fresh, not too greasy." Secretary Li said, "I've already ordered it. It'll be here soon." About 5 minutes later, Secretary Li came over with a doctor, and he was carrying a large food box. Seeing Su Mu lying on the sofa and the smell of alcohol in the air, Secretary Li sighed in his heart. Ching knew how to play. Why couldn't CEO Yi keep his bad taste at home? Why did he have to make it so ugly in the company? She put the things down. "CEO Yi, this is Dr. Lin from the company's infirmary. Her medical skills are pretty good." Yi Xiangnan nodded, walked to the sofa in front of the French window and sat down. He reached out and patted Su Mu's shoulder. "Let the doctor take a look." Su Mu looked at him obediently. Later, when the doctor asked her to stick out her tongue, she stuck out her tongue and took her body temperature. She was as obedient as a child. Dr. Lin didn't know whether to laugh or cry. "CEO Yi, Madam Yi has already caught a cold, and now that she's drunk, she has to be careful in the future. She shouldn't drink when she's sick. Moreover, judging from her physique, she must have suffered from malnutrition when she gave birth. Malnutrition? Yi Xiangnan frowned. What do you mean? Dr. Lin had actually heard a little about Mrs. Ye's legend. Based on his observation, he made a bold guess: maybe she didn't have a good life during her pregnancy, so she didn't have enough nutrition. It's probably the same after giving birth. She didn't seem to get better these few years. Mrs. Yi was really skinny. Yi Xiangnan thought for a while. She was indeed quite skinny. His eyes fell on Sumu, and his fingers gently touched a strand of her hair. She usually wouldn't let him touch her, but she hadn't sobered up yet, so she didn't push him away. Yi Xiangnan had a strange feeling in his heart, and then he said, "Is there any way to make it up?" Chapter 4982. Yi Xiangnan felt strange and then he said, "Is there any way to make it up?" Dr. Lin smiled. "It's hard to make it up, but it depends on the person. If she lives a happy life and has less pressure, she'll be fine in 2 years. After all, she's still young." Mrs. Yi was only 24 years old. It was good to be young. Yi Xiangnan frowned and said calmly, "Is she fit for work?" Dr. Lin smiled without thinking. "Of course it's best for her to rest. It's good that Mrs. Yi has this condition. Also, it's best that she doesn't drink. She might be allergic to alcohol and all kinds of drugs." Yi Xiangnan thought of the morning after medicine last time and his expression changed. Secretary Li glanced at him. Her boss glared at her. Secretary Li didn't dare to look at him anymore. She asked Dr. Lin, "Is there anything to pay attention to when you prescribe the medicine?" Dr. Lin looked at Su Mu and smiled. "Mrs. Yi, you haven't sobered up yet. Take some antipyretics. You may have to feed her." As for the food that she hadn't eaten, she probably had to feed her. Secretary Li got the hint and smiled to himself. CEO Ye's bad taste was really messing with her. She turned around and returned to her office. Then, she processed it and disseminated it. It was said that CEO Yi loved Mrs. Yi very much. He let her sleep in his lounge during the day. CEO Yi even fed Mrs. Yi alcohol, which made her have a fever. Now he was feeding her medicine and food, serving her like a little child. Starlight was eating melons from top to bottom, relishing in the conversation. However, there was one person who was disturbed by the rumors. He stood quietly in the private office of the legal team on the 18th floor, looking at the scenery outside the window. Shen Wenshuan knew very well that Su Mu had been targeted by Yi Xiannan. If he wanted her to be Mrs. Yi, Su Mu would not be able to escape. No matter what, she would not be able to escape. He had just made a phone call to his teacher. Lawyer Chen had a few words with him over the phone. In general, he hoped that he could stay in Star's entertainment. Shen Wenshuan said that he would consider it. After hanging up, he heard his secretary gossiping outside. Shen Wenshuan heard it even if he didn't want to, although they wouldn't say it after seeing him. He didn't blame them. Everyone at work was gossipy, not to mention CEO Ye's private affairs. He knew that Su Mu couldn't drink, but Yi Xiangnan got her drunk in the office. He was quite annoyed, but what could he do? In ancient times, people would elope regardless of everything. But now, where could they go? Even if he was willing, Su Mu would not give up on her son. Shen Wenshuan finally understood that Su Mu's life would be better only if he completely let go. Today, Yi Xiangnan's target was not Su Mu, but himself. He looked at his phone. After a long time, he sent a message to his sister, asking her to arrange a blind date. Although Shen Wenyuan was surprised, she was happy that her brother had become sensible. Shen Wenshuan put down his phone and sat on the sofa, still quietly looking out the window. Some stories were destined to end before they even started. *Stars Entertainment CEO's office. After Dr. Lin left, Secretary Li wanted to stay but was chased away by Yi Xiangnan. In the big office, only he and Su Mu were left. Su Mu laid on the sofa again, quietly. If it wasn't for her eyes open, he would have thought that she had fallen asleep again. He reached out and touched her face. "Take your medicine." He put the medicine in his palm and asked her to come over to take it. This was already a very good attitude. Yao Yao's new book is released. Book title: She's Spoiled by the Paranoid Boss. Please collect Su Shuang's pampering. Chapter 4983. He put the medicine in his palm and asked her to eat it. This was already a very good attitude. However, it was still like feeding a puppy. Su Mu did what he asked her to do in a daze. She lowered her head and ate the medicine from his palm. Then, she frowned. It was very bitter. Yi Xiangnan handed over the water. "Drink some water." He complained, "It's my first time serving someone like this. I'm not born to be a lackey like Shenting." Qin Yi Huan was probably conquered by that wave of gentleness. Yi Xiangnan felt upset just thinking about it. He, young Master Yi, was handsome, had good grades and excelled in all aspects since he was young. Shenting ruined his life, and then came Su Mu, who brought a son over. It was really great. Su Mu was still a little distracted. She didn't drink the water properly and her clothes were wet. She looked quite disheveled. Yi Xiangnan felt that he owed her, but he couldn't get angry. After all, he was the one who made her drunk and made her sick. As he helped her, he muttered, "What kind of bad luck did I have to be in such a miserable state to have to serve you?" She really couldn't wear her clothes anymore, otherwise, her condition would probably worsen. He could only carry her back to the lounge. She refused, so he used some brute force to help her change her clothes. He took out his shirt and coat from the closet for her to change into. Later, he was really afraid that she would dirty her clothes again, so he fed her directly. Young Master Yi had never done this before. In the past, when Yi Huan was sick, it was always Shenting who took care of her. As he fed her, he looked at Su Mu. Just as the doctor said, she was indeed very thin, very, very thin. Her shoulder blades were all ribs. He didn't know where she got the strength from when she was always hugging the Cymbidium chinense. Yi Xiangnan fed her a few mouthfuls randomly. He really couldn't feed her, and he didn't have the mood to eat. After feeding her, Su Mu refused to sleep and wanted to sit on the sofa. He was sure that she was still drunk. He had business to attend to, so he left her there and threw a coat for her to put on. Secretary Li came over to pack up and saw that one of them was working while the other was lying on the sofa looking outside. Secretary Li actually felt that it was quite harmonious. CEO Yi wasn't as unreasonable as she thought. Wasn't he taking good care of her? She packed her things and went out, she thought to herself as she stood at the door. Perhaps CEO Yi was not completely indifferent. He more or less had some feelings, at least some subtle feelings that he himself could not understand. After all, it was normal for a rich family to have another child. No stepmother would dare to make things difficult for Cymbidium chinense, but CEO Yi insisted on marrying Su Mu. It sounded quite sweet and devoted. Secretary Li felt as if he had been KO'd something. The door was closed, and the office was quiet again. Yi Xiangnan was handling official business. The pen in his hand was writing on the paper, making a rustling sound. After some time, there was a weak voice from the other side. "Mom, I don't want to abort this child, I beg you." Yi Xiangnan abruptly raised her eyes, her pitch-black pupils landing on her. Sumu was talking in her sleep. She had a nightmare. As for what kind of nightmare it was, Yi Xiangnan didn't need to ask to know. He put down the pen in his hand and walked over slowly. Sumu's forehead was full of sweat. When he touched her hand, it was cold. She was curled up there, very thin, so she looked a little pitiful. Chapter 4984. Yi Xiannan's fingers were about to leave, but as if by some miracle, they fell back and rested on her forehead. Was it very painful? Was it very painful? That was why she was so thin. He even thought of the pitiful puppies by the roadside, crying for food, but there was none. They could only shrink in the corner and endure the hunger and cold. CEO Ye's imagination was very good. Just by thinking about it, he put himself in the shoes. He carried Sumu to the resting room and let her sleep under the blanket. She clamored to come out. In the end, he had no choice but to hug her tightly. Sumu was still very cold. In the end, she only felt better after lying in his arms. Yi Xiangnan looked at the time, took out his phone from his pocket and called Wen Yuan, telling him to pick up Cymbidium chinense. He couldn't leave here because Sumu was sick. Wen Yuan was quite worried and wanted to come over to take a look, but Yi Xiangnan said that there was no big problem. Wen Yuan thought about it later. For the sake of Sumu's reputation, he tolerated it and prepared to pick up Cymbidium chinense. After picking up Cymbidium chinense, Wen Yuan brought him home. At the headquarters of Starlight. After work, the employees got off work one after another, but Yi Xiangnan's car was still there. After Mrs. Yi went up, it seemed that she hadn't come down. At around 8:00 in the evening, the last shift walked past the parking lot. CEO Ye's car was still there. Wow, so strong. CEO Yi hadn't slept yet. It was quiet in the CEO's office on the top floor. When Sumu woke up, it was almost 10:30. The reason why she didn't wake up was that no one disturbed her. Yi Xiangnan had turned off his phone. When she moved, Yi Xiangnan woke up too. He opened his eyes and looked at her. There was no light in the resting room. The timeline was good during the day, and there were floor-to-ceiling windows. When she woke up, half of the night view of B City was in front of her. The room was dark, and there was only a faint light. It was quite beautiful. If it was a couple, it would be very romantic. Unfortunately, they were not. Sumu bit her lip and said softly, "What time is it?" Yi Xiangnan's arm was about to go numb. He stretched and reached out to turn on the bedside lamp. It was a little dark, but it didn't hurt his eyes. He looked at the time and said, "It's past 10:00. Sumu immediately sat up. He pulled her down and said, "What's the hurry?" "My mom went to pick up Cymbidium chinense." Did he look like someone with such a low IQ? Sumu let out a long sigh. She felt that she was covered in hot sweat and felt uncomfortable. Yi Xiangnan also felt it. He propped himself up and looked at her. "Go take a shower. I'll ask someone to send clothes over." It was fine here, but she couldn't go out wearing his clothes. Sumu looked at him. He took out a shirt from the closet and threw it to her. "Wear this first." He turned the temperature to 28 degrees. Sumu was completely sober. She went to take a shower. Yi Xiangnan also took a shower. After he came out, he made a phone call. "The clothes will be sent over in a while. Take the medicine first and stay at my place tonight," he said in a low voice, which sounded a little gentle in the middle of the night. Sumu was sick and he made her drink. At this moment, she was weak and didn't have much resistance. She didn't insist. It didn't matter if she stayed for one night. Or maybe it was because of his previous gentleman. Yi Xiangnan curled his lips. Miss Su, don't think too much. I don't like a bunch of bones. Su Mu glared at him. He had a good temper. Let's go out for dinner later. Chapter 4985. Su Mu glared at him, but he had a good temper. Let's go out for dinner later. Su Mu was drying her hair, wearing only his shirt. Yi Xiangnan's eyes fell on her, which made Su Mu quite uncomfortable. He moved his eyes away and snorted, "What do you think I'm looking at? It's all ribs without any meat. What's there to look at?" It's not nice, but he still looked at it a few more times. Oh, it smells so good. While she was drying her hair, Yi Xiangnan took a hairdryer. Blow it, or you'll catch a cold later. Su Mu looked at him and accepted it silently. He seemed to be used to taking care of her, so he went to get some water and medicine and let her take it. She didn't thank him. It was his fault. He fed her alcohol. If she didn't drink, she would be fine. Yi Xiangnan was tidying up his clothes. Secretary Li came over and opened the door. She opened her eyes wide. Oh my God, CEO Yi, and Mrs. Yi. This scene was really a bit painful to the eyes. Secretary Li didn't dare to look at it. She put the bag away. CEO Yi, Mrs. Ye's clothes. After that, she nodded to Su Mu and said hello. Obviously, Su Mu was very favored now. CEO Yi accompanied her to take a nap during the day. It should be known that CEO Yi rarely gave up his work, not to mention for a woman. Secretary Li felt that she should take a side. She had to take Su Mu's side. She bet that Su Mu could sit firmly on the position of Mrs. Yi. Secretary Li even made a gesture to cheer her on and left with satisfaction. Su Mu was quite speechless. Yi Xiangnan tidied up his clothes and looked at her. Put on your clothes and go for dinner. At this time, it was nearly 11 o'clock. It was a midnight snack. Su Mu took the bag into the dressing room and closed the door. Yi Xiangnan stared at the door. After a while, he smiled faintly and didn't say anything. After a few minutes, Su Mu came out, and Yi Xiangnan looked at her indifferently. Secretary Li had good taste. She picked out a wool skirt for her. It was a good fit for her skin and made her shoulders look thin and slender. It made people want to hug her. Take a jacket. Yi Xiangnan took out a windbreaker from his wardrobe and gave it to her. It was originally a medium-length style, but it was surprisingly suitable for her. Yi Xiangnan looked at her and said lightly, "Let's go." Su Mu pursed her lips and walked out with him. It was late at night. The prosperity of this city was about to come to an end. The parking lot was quiet and empty. Yi Xiangnan walked to his car, opened the door and got in. He then opened the front passenger door from the inside. Su Mu sat next to him and said lightly, "I'll go back and cook a bowl of noodles." Yi Xiangnan said casually as he fastened his seatbelt, "Dr. Lin said that you're malnourished." Su Mu was a little embarrassed, as if she had been seen through. Yi Xiangnan sat down with his hands on the steering wheel and looked ahead. Take a good rest. She didn't object anymore. Yi Xiangnan started the car and asked her casually while driving, "What do you want to eat?" Su Mu turned her face away and looked at the night outside the car window. After a while, she said softly, "Chinese food is fine." Yi Xiangnan smiled and said, "I thought women would like French food or something." Su Mu didn't say anything, but she thought that it was because the women he dated all ate French food. She didn't say anything else and sat quietly beside him. Chapter 4986. Finally, Yi Xiangnan takes her to a Chinese restaurant. It's not very high-end, but it's clean and unique. He stops the car. The pork bone soup is very good. Drink more later. Sumu follows him out of the car. To her surprise, there are many people in this restaurant, even though it's very late. It's almost full. There are no VIPs in this kind of place, so Yi Xiangnan barely finds a table and sits down. The waiter comes to order. It's not the first time for him to come here, so he directly orders a bowl of pork bone soup and a few stir-fried dishes. Sumu's eyes fall on his fingers holding the menu. His fingers are really beautiful. They are spicy with distinct joints. As she looks at them, she is a little lost in thought. When Yi Xiangnan closes the menu, he looks at her expression and smiles silently. He says to the waiter, "My wife doesn't eat spicy food. Don't put it in, thank you." The waiter is also fascinated by the noble young Master Yi. He doesn't come to himself for a while, and then he repeats, "This wife. What doesn't she eat?" Sumu is quite speechless. Yi Xiangnan is a little bit naughty. He repeats again, "My wife doesn't eat spicy food." Sumu pretends to pour tea to drink, but she chokes after taking a sip. Yi Xiangnan slightly raises the corner of his mouth. He doesn't say anything more. He just pats her back a few times. It looks like they are really in love. The waiter flashes again. She feels that such a good-looking and noble man is gentle to women. This woman is really happy. She is so envious. She takes the menu and leaves. Yi Xiangnan holds the teacup and takes a sip of tea. He smiles and says, "Having a meal makes you so happy. Who knows what kind of happy life will be in the future." Sumu can't stand his shamelessness. She snorts, "I don't seem to be happy." "Mr. Yi, don't flatter yourself." Yi Xiangnan put down the cup in his hand. "I put aside my important work and served you for the whole day. You don't even have a word of thanks." "Thank you." Sumu said it directly, but it didn't sound sincere. Yi Xiangnan felt that he was the kind of person who would stick his face to someone else. He smiled faintly and said nothing more. When he didn't speak, he was very noble and especially charming. Because he had a good appearance and temperament, he was the center of attention here. He had long been used to this kind of attention, so he didn't mind it at all. However, Sumu felt that his appearance was too ostentatious. Too beautiful, too delicate. In the past, when she saw Cymbidium chinense, she didn't think much of it. Perhaps it was normal for children to be prettier, but sitting opposite such a big one made her feel a little pressured. Just as she was lost in her thoughts, Yi Xiangnan leaned against the back of the chair behind him and chuckled. "I don't care about this, but you seem to care a lot. Or are you secretly happy?" Sumu was furious. She ignored him and didn't respond to his words. She didn't want to be tricked. Yi Xiangnan was in a good mood. At least he found some fun other than interacting with ladies from prestigious families or smart women like Lin Lu. The dishes were served very quickly. The first dish was the bone soup. It was quite a big pot and was served piping hot. It looked very appetizing. Other than the big bone, there were also corn, lotus roots, etc. It was fragrant and soft. Even Sumu, who usually didn't care much about food, was tempted. She took a bowl and wanted to scoop the soup to drink. Yi Xiangnan sat there like a young master. "Help me fill a bowl too." Yao Yao released a new book. The title of the book is She is Spoiled by the Paranoid Boss. It was rumored that little Mrs. Bo was very talented. She was proficient in drawing, racing, playing the piano, and mixing incense. Mr. Bo was gratified and said, "It's all thanks to her peers." It was also rumored that little Mrs. Bo was very cruel. Many socialites who coveted Mr. Bo were beaten until they couldn't take care of themselves. As a result, people often came to complain. Mr. Bo was very protective. Little Mrs. Bo is protecting a weak man like me. Everyone in Bay City wanted to vomit blood. Weak? Mr. Bo sneered. Why? Are you questioning my words? Little Mrs. Bo smiled. It's time to let you know what cruelty is. Close the door and let Mr. Bo go. The male lead is strong and the female commander has multiple identities. Focus on torturing the trash. Pamper, pamper, feel good. Chapter 4987. Yi Xiangnan sat there like a young master. Help me get a bowl too. Why? Su Mu couldn't help but argue with him. Yi Xiangnan said matter-of-factly, I'll pay. Of course, you have to wait on me. Su Mu said straightforwardly, then I'll pay. Yi Xiangnan glanced at her. Can't you be a little cuter? You're so stiff. How did Chen Wenchuan fall for you in the first place? His tone wasn't pleasant, and Su Mu wasn't happy either. After eating a piece of bone, she said softly, I don't know either. Just like now, I don't know why you insist on marrying me. How can it be the same? We got married because we had a baby. Yi Xiangnan rolled his eyes at her. Oh right, Su Mu, you'd better stay away from Shen Wenchuan. I don't need you to remind me. I don't want to hurt him. Su Mu scooped a bowl of soup for him and said softly. Yi Xiangnan drank the pork rib soup that his wife had scooped for him and looked up. What you said is quite meaningful. You can think whatever you want. Su Mu pursed his lips lightly. Yi Xiangnan didn't say anything else. Anyway, they had already gotten their marriage certificate, and Su Mu couldn't do anything about it. After drinking a bowl of pork rib soup, her whole body felt warm. Then, stir-fried dishes were served one after another, and they all tasted pretty good. After eating, Yi Xiangnan looked at Su Mu. You're so thin. Drink one more bowl. Su Mu wiped her lower lip. Almost. I can't eat any more. He had interacted with her many times and found that she didn't seem to eat snacks much other than proper meals. She rarely ate fruits. That's why she's so thin, right? Fortunately, he was not unsightly and looked rather decent. While Yi Xiangnan was thinking, Su Mu had already gone to pay the bill. Originally, he wanted to stop her, but on second thought, it seemed to be a good idea for his wife to pay the bill. When Su Mu paid the bill, she was shocked. A pot of soup and a few stir-fried dishes cost more than 1,000 yuan. Yi Xiangnan stood behind her. He probably knew that she was complaining in her heart. He chuckled and said, pigs are expensive now. Su Mu glanced at him and took out her wallet to pay the bill. It was still quite painful. Yi Xiangnan watched her pay the bill. There were only 200 or 300 yuan left in her wallet. He leaned on the side and smiled. It feels so poor. It's so pitiful. Su Mu glared at him and walked out first. Yi Xiangnan followed. The cashier's eyes widened. Was it because she was eating with such a good-looking and noble man that she was spending money? If possible, she also wanted to treat this noble man to a meal. It was more than 1,000 yuan. It would be good to look at him for an hour. He was so good-looking, even better than the popular idols. He was full of noble aura. On the other side, Su Mu got into the car. When she fastened her seatbelt, she whispered, "You did it on purpose, didn't you? You came to such a place to make your presence known." Yi Xiangnan sat in the car and chuckled. "You finally admit it. Sumu bit her lip. Admit what? Admit that I'm good-looking. Those women are looking at me. He chuckled even more mischievously. She had to admit that he was deliberately teasing her. However, Sumu's heart was made of stone and he was unmoved. Yi Xiangnan was about to doubt his own charm. Sumu was more cold. But that wasn't right. Didn't she like Shen Wenchuan before? No, she still liked Shen Wenchuan now. There was someone else in her heart, so she didn't like him. For a moment, Yi Xiangnan was in a bad mood. His face was dark and he didn't say anything. Chapter 4988. Sumu didn't know why his face suddenly darkened, but she didn't think too much about it. Anyway, he had the temper of a young master. It was late at night, past 12 o'clock. Although Sumu slept for a day, she was still weak and fell asleep in the car again. Yi Xiangnan looked at her sideways, then turned up the temperature. He looked at her with a tenderness that he couldn't understand. He didn't know why he was so nice to her and why he accommodated her. She was not his ideal woman. She was not good-looking and had a bad temper. But he was willing to give in. He even thought that if he could live well, he would probably be like his father, faithful to his wife and chastity to the end of his life. If she cared about these things. Later on, Yi Xiannan had thought about it. This period of time was probably the time when he was the most gentle to her, and it was also somewhat sincere. He held up the title of Madam Yi and heavenly riches in front of her, but she was still indifferent. The person she loved and liked was the person she had to let go of when she was young. But at this time, he didn't know that one day he would be so obsessed with Sumu that he wanted to destroy her if he couldn't get her, and he would go crazy if she didn't love him. At this time, he was alone with her in the car, and there was a rare tenderness in his heart. This tenderness could only be produced for a woman. Even in the past, he rarely had this tenderness for Yi Huan, because he and Yi Huan grew up together when they were young. In his heart, she was always a young girl. But Sumu was different. She was a woman who gave birth to his child. He suddenly found that Sumu was actually younger than Yi Huan, and even as old as Yi Hui. She was still very young, but she was forced to grow up. When he looked at Sumu, he never regarded her as a girl, but a woman, whether he hated her or, now. Yi Xiannan's thoughts ran wild the entire way as she drove back to the villa she lived in. Auntie Chen and the others had already slept, and the lights were on in the villa hall. In the past, he would always go home alone. Tonight, he brought someone back. Sumu was in a deep sleep and did not wake up when he picked her up. Yi Xiangnan was not interested in taking advantage of others. He lowered his head and stared at her sleeping appearance. He wasn't ugly. He was thin and looked like he weighed nothing in his arms. It was late at night, but his mood was much better. He walked straight to the door of the master bedroom on the second floor and gently kicked the door open. 2 hours later, Yi Xiangnan came out of the bathroom. Sumu was still asleep. Her face was buried in the pillow, and her dark hair covered half of her face. She was in a deep sleep, and there were dark circles under her eyes. She looked quite pitiful, just like her purse. Yi Xiannan suddenly chuckled and tugged at her hair with her fingers. He had slept a lot during the day, so he was not sleepy at this time. He sat on the edge of the bed and looked at Sumu for a while before going to the study to deal with the work that had not been done during the day. As the CEO of Starlight, it wasn't easy for him. At about 4:30, he returned to the master bedroom and slept together. Sumu was in a deep sleep, so she did not notice him coming back. But early the next morning, when she woke up alone in the master bedroom, she was stunned. She sat up and looked at the black shirt on her body. She was sure that this was Yi Xiangnan's shirt. Chapter 4989. The memories slowly came back, and her face turned pale. Just then, the door of the master bedroom opened, and Yi Xiangnan said, "You're awake. I'm going to the company in a while. Aren't you going to the newspaper office? I'll send you, but you have to get up now." As he spoke, he raised his hand to check the time. "You only have 20 minutes. Sumu sat on the bed and looked at him. Yi Xiangnan found it funny. "Are you secretly happy again?" Sumu looked a little confused, she even looked a little regretful. Looking at her expression, Yi Xiangnan's mood suddenly turned bad. He put his hands in his pockets and looked down at her. "Regretful?" Sumu hugged the quilt and said, "It seems too late to regret." Only then did Yi Xiangnan's mood improve a little. He looked at her and said, "You've already given birth to a child. This kind of thing is normal." He thought for a moment and specially said, "You don't have to take medicine." At first, it was fine. Sumu had tried hard to convince herself to forget, but when she heard those words, she felt a little ashamed again. She pursed her lips and didn't say a word. Yi Xiangnan's voice softened a little. "Get up and eat breakfast. There are clothes that suit you in the closet." He probably wanted to give her some space, so he turned around and went downstairs. Indeed, his mood wasn't as good as before. After closing the door, Sumu let out a long breath. She calmed down for a while before going to the bathroom. She turned on the cold water and splashed it on her face. Although she had fallen asleep last night, it wasn't quite right to say that he had taken advantage of her or that it was one-sided. Sumu patted his own face. "I'm just a single man. How did she become like this? Was she the same as the girls in the restaurant? Did she like his appearance and revealed it at the critical moment?" Sumu brushed her teeth, washed her face, changed her clothes and went downstairs. Yi Xiangnan had finished his breakfast and was reading a magazine on the sofa. When she came down, he only raised his eyes slightly and said softly, "Hurry up and eat your breakfast. We'll be leaving in a while." Sumu wanted to say something, but when she saw Auntie Chin, she didn't want to say anything. She smiled at Auntie Chin as a greeting. Auntie Chin was very friendly. "Madam, it's time for breakfast. I made Chinese porridge, noodles, and all kinds of side dishes. You can eat whatever you want." Sumu was not used to her calling her madam, but she did not correct her. She just wanted to finish eating and leave as soon as possible. So she said softly, "I'll drink some porridge." Auntie Chin smiled. "Sir and madam are doing quite well. This is what a normal couple should be like." Although she didn't know why her husband suddenly brought his wife back, it was obvious that they had a good relationship. Auntie Chin felt that she was also a little happy. Perhaps Sir and Madam were going to have a wedding soon. Under Auntie Chen's gaze, Sumu felt more pressure. She finished her breakfast quickly and got up. "I'm ready." Yi Xiangnan folded the newspaper, took the car key, and got in the car first to wait for her. Sumu walked fast, and Auntie Chin was still shouting behind her. "Slow down, madam. Slow down. What if madam got pregnant again?" It was not that she was overthinking. She was too young and seemed to get pregnant easily. It had to be said that Auntie Chin was really overthinking. After Sumu got in the car, her voice was a little low. "Mr. Yi, I have something to say to you." Yi Xiangnan started the car and said softly, "You still call me Mr. Yi?" Chapter 4990. Sumu was silent for a while and said, "Just pretend that it never happened. It was just an accident." "Never happened." Accident. Yi Xiannan repeated himself only after the car had driven out of the villa. His voice was somewhat mocking, and he even took the time to look at her. Su Mu sat quietly beside him and said, "What else can I do? What else can I do?" Yi Xiangnan was a little annoyed. Didn't she feel anything at all? Was he good-looking, or was there something else she wasn't satisfied with? He thought that he was superior in every aspect, but Su Mu was indifferent to him. Where did she get her confidence from? The car suddenly screeched to a stop. He turned his head and gritted his teeth. "Su Mu, are you heartless?" She didn't say anything. Yi Xiangnan was really a little angry. He wanted to throw her on the side of the road, but that would be very ungentlemanly. Besides, he did take advantage of her. She didn't take the initiative and did it willingly. Although she did decline, she still took advantage of him. Thinking of this, he felt a little better and started the car again. After a while, Su Mu tilted her head to look at him. She felt that his mood was fluctuating between good and bad. Was it menopause? She was a little suspicious. So Su Mu said very carefully, "Yi Xiangnan, you don't have to endure it. I didn't endure it last night." His voice was a little cold. What was this woman saying? He could guarantee that what she said next would not be pleasant. Sure enough, Su Mu said, "I don't care about other women. After all, we're not married." "Who told you that we're not married?" Yi Xiangnan's tone was even worse. He looked at her and said, "Have you forgotten what happened last night?" Su Mu didn't say anything. She didn't dare to say anything. She was a little afraid of Yi Xiangnan. She did not know what he wanted. If it was just a simple obligation, she would have done it, but he still said some strange things. She didn't want to be a real husband and wife with him, because they were people from two different worlds, because they didn't love each other, because they didn't have feelings for each other. Su Mu didn't want to force herself. There was also the matter of Shen Wenxuan, which made her feel very uncomfortable. Yi Xiangnan's role in this was very dishonorable, and she always felt a little uncomfortable in her heart. She didn't say anything, which represented her attitude. Night Thoughts of the South Pole smiled faintly. He could roughly guess what she was thinking. "I can give you some time," he said rather humanely. "Think about the Cymbidium chinense. It can't be left with my mom forever." He paused for a moment. "My parents didn't have a good relationship with each other in the past. Didn't they give birth to Yi Hui later on? Aren't they fine now?" "Su Mu, not every relationship is perfect at the beginning. You are refusing to accept me. Maybe you already like me, but you are rejecting me." As he said that, he frowned. "Is it so difficult to admit that I like you?" Su Mu was speechless. Yi Xiangnan was absolutely confident and narcissistic. He had thought of everything for her. If he had experienced what she had gone through, he wouldn't have said that she liked him so easily. What Yi Xiangnan brought to her was really not very good. Other than pain, it was a painful experience. Su Mu planned to start over. She didn't have Yi Xiangnan in her life for the time being. If he wanted to tie her with a certificate, she would not be willing. Her weapon was silence. Yi Xiangnan didn't force her. He left her at the entrance of the newspaper office and left. Chapter 4991. After getting out of the car, Su Mu went upstairs. She took out a small mirror from her bag and tidied herself up. However, she was surprised to find that her wallet seemed to be bulging. She was stunned and then opened it. There was about 4,000 to 5,000 yuan in it. It was a thick stack. She recalled how Yi Xiangnan looked at her paying the bill last night and said that she was pitiful. Su Mu pursed her lips and stared outside for a long time. She felt a little strange in her heart. She went to the newspaper office. When Yuan was familiar with the society here, but he didn't come here often. Everything was decided by the chief editor. The chief editor was called Zhang Fucai, and people called him Uncle Kai. After Su Mu went over, he was quite polite and assigned her to the society news team. After that, Zhang Fucai personally led her outside, pointed out the seats, and introduced her to the colleagues. Today, we have a new colleague, Su Mu. Call her Little Su from now on. She's new and inexperienced, so you guys should take care of her. As he said that, he pointed to a middle-aged woman in her 40s. This is Sister Hong. In the future, you should learn more from her. If you don't understand, just ask. This is Little One. She's considered half a newcomer. Get along well in the future. For the chief editor to introduce him in such a serious manner, he must have some background, and his background must be very strong. Little One immediately understood. After the chief editor, Uncle Kai, left, she turned her chair and said in a slightly low voice, Su Mu, are you working for the chief editor or the president? Su Mu didn't understand. She sat down and looked at Little One. At this moment, Sister Hong coughed and said in a slightly strict voice, it doesn't matter who I'm working for. You have to have the ability to work here. Have you done what I asked you to do, Little One? Little One stuck out her tongue. Yes, Sister Hong. I'll do it right away. Sister Hong shook her head. The society only finds unreliable people with connections. As she said that, she seemed to notice Su Mu. You, what do you know? Su Mu shook her head. I've never come into contact with it before. Sister Hong's expression turned even uglier. She casually asked while looking through the documents, which university did he graduate from? He dropped out of school in his second year, B University, Su Mu said softly. At this moment, Sister Hong turned her head and looked at her in surprise. Shi Shue. Dropping out of B University. Su Mu, are you kidding me? How did you get yourself killed? Su Mu didn't know how to answer. Sister Hong looked at her from head to toe. Are you married? Actually, Su Mu looked quite young, but Sister Hong felt that she had the look of a woman. Su Mu thought about the marriage certificate, then thought about the child, and nodded. Yes. He's 4.5 years old. As soon as she finished speaking, everyone in the office looked at her in horror. Little One asked weakly, Su Mu, how old are you? Your child is already 4.5 years old. You're already pregnant when you've just reached adulthood. Su Mu didn't want to say Yi Xiangnan's name. Besides, it was indeed not very honorable. She lowered her voice. The child is legal. There was still no sound in the office, and everyone looked at her with a strange expression. Sister Hong broke the silence. Why do you care if he has a child or is married? Business is the most important thing here. Whoever can't do it can get lost. For Sister Hong to say something like that, she definitely had the confidence to back it up. She led the new social team. Originally, it was unpopular, but Sister Hong was very capable. She had the title of Iron Lady in the industry. Not to mention the chief editor, Uncle Kai, even the society valued Sister Hong very much. The Sun Daily couldn't do without her. Chapter 4992. With Sister Hong's voice, no one dared to speak ill of Su Mu in front of her again. However, they still had to talk for a while after a meal. Su Mu didn't care too much about it. She had to face it eventually. She didn't have a university diploma and was the mother of a 4-year-old child at the age of 23. It was easy to be criticized by others, but she didn't steal or rob, so she didn't feel inferior. Xiao Wen, who was sitting next to her, was quite easygoing. She stole a glance at Sister Hong and whispered, "Sumu, Sister Hong is very fierce, but she's a good person. She's very principled. You can learn a lot from her, but you have to be mentally prepared. You won't be able to survive under her hands." She pursed her lips and whispered again, "I hate her as much as I hate her." The editor-in-chief has a mistress in the entertainment section who is a sworn enemy of Sister Hong. The mistress wants to get rid of Sister Hong, but she can't. Don't be fooled by the editor-in-chief's appearance, she's very shrewd. Sumu, this newspaper office is very complicated. Don't take sides easily. Sumu smiled lightly. After Xiaowen finished speaking, she was satisfied. She felt like a senior. At this time, Sister Hong came over again. The sound of her high heels was crisp. She walked over and threw a stack of documents in front of Sumu. "This is the news section of the newspaper. Take a look and ask if you don't understand. You have to get started as soon as possible." Sumu took it and nodded. "Okay, Sister Hong." Sister Hong walked to her side, but after a few steps, she turned back. "By the way, I'm going on a business trip in a few days. Come with me. Don't pack too much, we're going to work. Female reporters aren't actresses, you know." Sumu was stunned. She didn't know that she had to go on a business trip to work. After thinking for a while, she said, "I applied for B University Media." Sister Hong didn't think much of it. "Is a diploma that important? You're already working." "Sumu, remember, society is the best university. You can decide for yourself if you want to go on a business trip with me or stay here as a typist." She would give the opportunity, but she did not want to be a person who always had a condition. Sue pursed her lips. "Can you let me think about it?" Although Sister Hong was strict, she wasn't unreasonable. She smiled and said, "There's only one chance, and it's only given to those who are prepared. Think about it carefully." Sumu smiled. Turning her head, Little Wen coughed lightly. "Have you thought it through? Actually, it's not a bad idea to spend your days here typing. If you have a background, you can earn 8 to 10,000 a month. You don't have to work so hard. Do you know what Sister Hong's nickname is? She's called the Desperate Third Lady." Sumu looked at her. "He's so old, but he's not married." Little Wen said softly, "Don't look at her. She's quite rich. News society isn't like the entertainment industry, but Sister Hong is very experienced and has a lot of connections. Many people want her resources, but Sister Hong isn't someone to be trifled with. She won't bring along anyone who isn't her trusted aide." Sumu nodded. Little Wen was busy with her own matters again. At the Sun News Agency, those who could follow Sister Hong were all warriors, and warriors were used to die in battle. Little Wen felt that smart people would know how to choose. It was good to retire at the news agency. Besides, to be able to work at B University Media was a dream of many people. But she didn't expect that Sumu would make such a choice. Sumu contacted B University and changed it to a freestyle course, so that she could attend it during exams. After making this decision, she still had to inform Wen Yuan and Yi Xiangnan. After all, if she were to go on a business trip frequently in the future, Cymbidium Chinense would have to ask them to take care of it. Chapter 4993. She was a little reluctant, but she felt that Sister Hong was right. Society was the best university. She wanted to seize this opportunity to learn from Sister Hong. After work, she went to Wen Yuan's place. Cymbidium Chinense had already been transferred to the villa. Wen Yuan treated Sumu as his wife. Firstly, they had registered their marriage. Secondly, he liked Sumu a lot. After Sumu told her, Wen Yuan unexpectedly agreed. It's good. You have a lot of ideas. Sumu was surprised. She smiled. Auntie, I thought you wouldn't agree. Why not? Chen Hong is very famous in the industry. You just have to learn from her. She's a very upright person. I'm very reassured if you follow her. When Yuan thought of something. I forgot to tell you. She used to be a paparazzi. Later, she couldn't stand the filthy atmosphere in the entertainment industry, so she went to work for a magazine. Sumu was even more surprised. Sister Hong was full of righteousness. She really didn't look like she used to be a paparazzi. When Yuan patted her hand. Heroes don't need to know where they come from. You'll be a very good reporter in the future. Sumu actually wanted to be a female anchor. It wasn't that she wanted to be in the limelight. She just liked it. She didn't tell Wen Yuan that she wanted to rely on herself. If she did, Wen Yuan would definitely pave the way for her. In the time it took to exchange a few words, it was dinner time. Yi Xiannan also came over. Sumu said that she wanted to leave. Wen Yuan wouldn't let her. Xiangnan won't eat you. Why are you running? Her mother was just saying it casually. She didn't think much of it. But Sumu took it seriously. Her face instantly heated up. Yi Xiangnan glanced at her and sat at the dining table. Fortunately, Wen Yuan didn't notice her. As a grandmother, she cared about whether her precious grandson was eating well. Sumu was touched to see how Wen Yuan was taking care of Xiangnan. She ate quietly. When Wen Yuan saw that she was not eating much, he looked at his son. Didn't you say that your wife is sick and you didn't take care of her? Sumu is so skinny, she needs to gain some weight. Sumu was embarrassed, but she couldn't refute him, so she could only force a smile. A piece of rib fell into her bowl. Then, Yi Xiangnan said calmly, "You're a little too skinny." Sumu's face became even hotter. Because he thought about what happened last night. When Yuan finally noticed her red face and frowned. "What's wrong with you? Why is your face so red?" As he spoke, he stretched out his hand and probed. Then, he said worriedly, "Did you not recover from your illness? It's very hot." Yi Xiangnan chuckled. Sumu buried her head in her food. Wen Yuan was also an experienced person. He was stunned for a moment before he understood. After that, the atmosphere was quite subtle. Yi Mubai glared at his wife fiercely. He was nosy. Wen Yuan was also a little innocent. She didn't expect her son to act so quickly. Didn't he say that he was sick? Why? As a mother, she looked at her son with a complicated expression. Yi Mubai, on the other hand, glanced at his wife. He was right, he was a beast. As a father, he could clearly see through his son's intentions. After the meal, Sumu was too embarrassed to disturb them. She couldn't treat herself as a member of the Yi family. When Yuan didn't ask her to stay. She wanted to give the young man a chance to be alone, so she gave her son a look. Yi Xiangnan was a little annoyed in the morning, but he still had some manners. So he took the car key. "I'll give you a ride." Chapter 49-94. Sumu wanted to refuse, but Yi Xiangnan insisted. When Yuan also said gently, "Let Xiangnan send you. It's quite late and there are no buses outside. It's hard to get a taxi. Xiangnan has to go back as well. It's on the way." Actually, it wasn't on the way. Wen Yuan knew that. But in order to make things easier for her son, she had to lie through her teeth. Su Mu couldn't refuse anymore. She realized that everything had changed after she and Yi Xiangnan had gotten their marriage certificate. There were some things that she had clearly thought about, but it was still different. She and Yi Xiangnan were inextricably linked. It was no longer the same as before. Su Mu followed Yi Xiangnan into the car. Just as the car was about to start, Cymbidium chinense ran over again. The little person was a little reluctant to part with her. He buried himself in Su Mu's arms and said softly, "Mummy, I want to sleep with you." Su Mu was also reluctant to part with the little guy, but it wasn't good for her to stay here. Wen Yuan wasn't unhappy, but she couldn't always trouble others. After all, she and Yi Xiangnan weren't real husband and wife. She couldn't treat herself as an outsider. She reached out to touch Cymbidium chinense's hair. Cymbidium chinense's hair was soft, just like him. Su Mu said softly, "You have to listen to Grandma, okay? Mummy will bring you back for a couple of days when I'm free." Cymbidium chinense nodded obediently and stayed in Su Mu's arms for a long time. Su Mu lowered her head and kissed him. Cymbidium chinense then ran away shyly. Su Mu couldn't bear to part with him. This child had been with her ever since he was born. But now she had to send him somewhere else. The Cymbidium chinense was not there, and the surroundings were empty. After closing the door, Yi Xiangnan started the car. After a while, he smiled faintly. "If you want to see him, you can come every day. My parents won't be annoyed if you live here. Su Mu, you're the one who thinks of yourself as an outsider. Don't tell me that you don't need to pay a price for your kindness." Su Mu turned her face out of the car window. The night was cold and foggy on the car window. Su Mu was gently drawing on it. Yi Xiangnan occasionally turned around and saw that she was lost in thought. He turned his head and concentrated on driving. After a while, he said, "You can think of it in a simpler way. We're just giving Cymbidium chinense a complete family, or a beautiful childhood." Su Mu didn't believe it. She had been with him for so long that she more or less knew his deep-rooted bad habits. After the incident with Lin Lu, she no longer trusted him. It was the privilege of rich young masters to put on a show. She didn't intend to fall in love with him. Even if there was something between them, it didn't mean that she would fall in love with such a person. She was ordinary, but she also had the right to be happy. If she couldn't be happy, she would choose to avoid misfortune. It was misfortune to fall in love with a man who liked to put on a show. Su Mu was very clear-headed, and she wasn't that stupid. Yi Xiangnan stopped the car in front of the red light. He looked ahead and spoke to Su Mu. "You're so resistant to marrying me. Is it because you want someone to marry, Shen Wenxuan?" He paused and suddenly said, "I forgot to tell you. Shen Wenxuan went on a blind date today. It was arranged by Shen Wenyuan. Also, he agreed to stay in Star's entertainment." With that, he turned his head and looked at Su Mu quietly. "Do you know what this means?" Su Mu pursed her lips and didn't say anything for a long time. Yi Xiangnan said softly and cruelly, "It means that he has given up." Su Mu turned her head. There was a trace of moisture in her eyes. "Please recommend me." Chapter 4995. For some reason, Yi Xiangnan avoided her eyes. He didn't want to look at her. He didn't want to see his wife sad or even cry because of another man. Finally, he drove back to his villa. Su Mu sat in the car, surprised and shocked. She turned her face and her eyes were slightly red. Yi Xiangnan. Yi Xiangnan unbuckled his seatbelt. "I'll stay here for one night. I'll sleep in the guest room. Seeing that she still wanted to say something, he suddenly got a little angry. Are you so sad? How long has it been since you and Shen Wenxuan last met? Sumu, we already have a son and got married. Do you think I'll let you be with another man? Yi Xiangnan, you're dominating me. Sumu reminded him coldly. Don't make yourself sound like you're deeply in love. We've tried it. Lin Lu's incident told me that we're not suitable for each other. Two people with different views can't live together. You and Shen Wenxuan have the same views. Then why did you run into my room back then? Yi Xiangnan said coldly, Sumu, don't make yourself sound so innocent and pure. If you hadn't walked into the wrong room back then, we'd be fine now. Our lives wouldn't have changed. Sumu was stunned for a moment, then she said very softly, yes, so isn't the price I've paid enough? Yi Xiangnan, Cymbidium chinense didn't come out of nowhere. He was born by me, alone in the hospital. Her eyes were a little red. I liked Shen Wenxuan, but so what? Can you bully me? He looked at her reddened eyes and his heart skipped a beat. But very quickly, he coldly said, did you fucking like him before? Do you still like him now? As he said that, he reached out to hold her chin and narrowed his eyes. Don't tell me that I bullied you yesterday. Sumu, you're not a child anymore. Don't you know what's going on? Sumu turned her face away in embarrassment, not wanting to talk to him. However, Yi Xiangnan did not want to let her off. Why aren't you saying anything? I've hit the nail on your head, huh? Sumu bit her lip. Yi Xiangnan, I don't know what you mean. It's exactly what you're thinking. He moved his handsome face closer to hers. His breath was on her face. Sumu turned her face away, but he didn't let her. Sumu, isn't it good to marry me? You can have everything you want. You don't need to go to a newspaper office at all. If you want the respect of others, I can give it to you. He said in a low voice, his voice was coaxing. Sumu's eyes slowly widened. They were too close, and she couldn't escape from him. The atmosphere in the narrow car also made people feel cramped. Sumu suddenly calmed down. Yi Xiangnan, do you love me? His fingers tightened. Her chin hurt, but she endured it and didn't say anything. Yi Xiangnan looked at her for a long time before he said in a low voice, you want me to love you, Sumu, right? No. She looked straight into his eyes. What I mean is, if you don't love me, these actions will be ridiculous. I have my own life, and I'm not a plaything for you. Plaything? Yi Xiangnan narrowed his eyes. She really dared to say it. He would take care of a plaything, bring her to eat in the middle of the night, and coax her to eat more. He even suffered 2 slaps from her. But now she said that he was just playing. Chapter 4996. 69 books. Updated quickly, it was true that he didn't have any expectations for marriage. He did have women outside, but he didn't treat her as a woman he could play with. Yi Xiangnan suddenly let go of her hand and stared at her coldly. After a while, he said softly, if you think so, that's good. He slowly fastened the seatbelt that had been unfastened and said coldly, fasten the seatbelt. Sumu was in a daze for a moment, but his car had already started. The car drove very fast. Sumu fastened the seatbelt, and her hands were trembling. Her face had also turned pale because of the speed of the car. She gripped the handrail tightly with one hand and said weakly, slow down. Yi Xiangnan ignored her, but the car slowed down after a while. The atmosphere in the car was very depressing, and Sumu didn't know why he was so angry. But she didn't want to know, and she didn't want to explain. The good sports car screeched to a stop when they arrived at her place. Yi Xiangnan sat and said coldly, "Get out of the car." Su Mu's fingers were on the car door, and she was about to get out. Yi Xiangnan said, "You can be with whoever you want in the future." Su Mu's heart was still beating violently. She turned her head. Yi Xiangnan looked dignified. "That's it. Miss Su, please get out of the car." He looked like an elegant young master who was afraid of being pestered by a woman, which made Su Mu feel a little embarrassed. She opened the car door, and her feet were a little shaky when she landed. As soon as she got out of the car, his car drove away. Su Mu ran to the side of the road and threw up. Yi Xiangnan didn't go back to the villa, but chose a bar with a good atmosphere and spent half the night there. Of course, a woman would throw herself into the arms of an outstanding man like him at any time. He didn't refuse and drank with her. As for what happened after that, no one knew. In short, the scene of them drinking face to face was photographed, and it even made the headlines of major entertainment companies. Su Mu only found out about it after going to work. The Sun Daily had an entertainment magazine, and the headline was about the CEO of Stars Entertainment's affair last night. He was leaning against the bar counter with a very beautiful and enchanting woman in his arms. The woman was holding a glass of wine and was practically sitting on his lap. There was another photo that was taken in the hallway. It was dark and gloomy. The woman was leaning against the wall, and the man was holding the wall with one hand. His eyes were clear and bright. Su Mu had seen this kind of gaze in Yi Xiangnan's eyes before. She stopped reading and closed the paper. Xiao Wen came over. "Su Mu, are you watching this too?" Su Mu forced a smile. Entertainment gossip. Xiao Wen's eyes were filled with envy. "I heard that CEO Yi is super good looking." Many women in the entertainment industry are willing to give themselves to him for free, but CEO Yi doesn't just accept them. Su Mu looked at her. Xiao Wen smiled. "It depends on his mood or his appetite. All rich men spend money." She continued, "I heard that he is married in secret. He has a son who is only a few years old. The woman is not good looking, so CEO Yi plays outside." Su Mu forced a smile. "You know so much. He's a celebrity." Xiao Wen chewed her gum. A man from a rich family never only belongs to his wife. When the wife gets married, she is prepared. I think Mrs. Yi must turn a blind eye to it. How can a man like CEO Yi be controlled? Su Mu looked at Xiao Wen. Why turn a blind eye to it? Isn't loyalty the basic principle of marriage? Xiao Wen's eyes widened, revealing an expression of, "Su Mu, you are so naive." Chapter 4997. Xiao Wen's eyes widened, showing an expression of, "Su Mu, you're so naive. Su Mu, don't get it wrong. Yi Xiangnan is the CEO of Stars Entertainment. He married a mediocre wife. Is it possible for a man like him to stay with his wife for the rest of his life?" Xiao Wen's expression was exaggerated. She thought that Su Mu was inflexible, but Su Mu nodded understandingly. "I think so too." Xiao Wen's mouth was wide open. After a long time, she said, "It's good that you think so. I thought you were very inflexible." "Why?" Su Mu asked softly. Xiao Wen smiled and said in a low voice, "I guess your child won the lottery at the first time. He insisted on giving birth to the child. This is inflexible. People nowadays are so fashionable." Su Mu shook his head and did not say anything else. For the whole morning, the whole newspaper office was talking about the CEO of Stars Entertainment. Even Sister Hong said a few words. Su Mu was the most silent. Her colleagues also thought that she was too embarrassed to express her opinion, so they didn't say anything. At the same time, at the headquarters of Stars Entertainment, Yi Xiangnan was sitting in the office. Secretary Li put a stack of newspapers in front of him and said softly, "CEO Yi, do you need to do some PR?" Yi Xiannan only glanced at it and then stared at her. PR? Where can I find PR? The photos were all over the place. Su Mu worked in the newspaper office. How could she not see it? Besides, he didn't care that much. If he could get it, then he could get it. Last night. That was all. He didn't bring a woman home, nor did he go to a woman's house. He didn't even kiss her. At that moment, he suddenly lost interest. Yi Xiangnan's tone was not good. Secretary Li sighed in her heart. CEO Yi is not happy again. He seemed to be in a good mood yesterday, but today he turned from gloomy to sunny again. A man in love was really terrible. Secretary Li nodded. Then we won't do PR. Yi Xiangnan stopped her. By the way, which newspapers and websites publish these photos? Please take care of them. Secretary Li smiled. Okay, CEO Yi, I will tell you. This was to suppress them. Other companies usually had to build a good relationship with the media. After all, the media had the right to speak. However, Stars Entertainment's background was different. Behind the starlight was the Wen family, which was like the sun at high noon. In the outside world, no one dared to say anything bad about the Wen family. He let them write about Yi Xiangnan's scandals because he didn't care. Now that he was married, they still wrote about it. Don't blame him for being rude. After Secretary Li left, Yi Xiangnan looked at the newspaper again. He had forgotten what the woman he drank with last night looked like. In fact, he was just angry. At that time, he did have the thought of indulging, but he didn't know why he gave up. It was not interesting. Besides, he was with Su Mu the day before, so he was fine. Yi Xiangnan threw the newspapers into the trash can and did not read them again. At the same time, Secretary Li called those news agencies' websites to warn them. Everyone was in danger. The Sun Daily also received a warning call. Zhang Fucai came out of the editor-in-chief's office in person and called a small meeting. It was actually a matter of the entertainment section, but it was a big deal, so the news agency also attended. The editor-in-chief's expression was quite serious. In the future, it's not that we can't report about the CEO of Stars Entertainment. Let me review the photos and text first. It must be positive. As he spoke, he glanced around. Do you know who the CEO of Stars Entertainment is? Chapter 4998. As he spoke, he glanced around. Do you know who the president of Stars Entertainment is? His subordinates didn't speak, and Sister Hong was holding back her laughter. She thought the baldy was quite funny. Who didn't know who the president of Stars Entertainment was? Editor-in-chief Zhang saw Su Mu in the crowd and called her name. Su Mu, you tell him. Who is the president of Stars Entertainment? Su Mu was stunned and speechless. She couldn't squeeze out a word for a long time. Xiao Wen kicked her foot. Editor-in-chief is asking you a question. Just say a few words. Don't be too serious. Su Mu came back to her senses and said softly, he is a very positive person. Editor-in-chief Zhang immediately laughed. What is awareness? Look, our Su Mu is awareness. He cleared his throat. We can despise this kind of playboy in our hearts, we can look down on him for flirting with girls all day long, but just because he is the president of Stars Entertainment and because his uncle is so and so one, he must be positive. Do you understand? The people below were all holding back their laughter. Editor-in-chief was really mean. After the meeting was adjourned and they continued to work. Su-mu was quite busy. She quickly integrated into the work, and before she knew it, it was time to get off work. Sister Hong stood behind her and praised, "You're quite serious. Hurry up and learn to be my right-hand man. Don't learn from these people who don't want to make progress." Su-mu looked up, smiled, and didn't say anything. This newspaper office was quite obsessed. It was reasonable to say that Su-mu would be despised and excluded by others after receiving such praise, but most people in the Sun newspaper were still as relaxed as Xiao Wen, so they were eager to have someone like Su-mu who was willing to follow Sister Hong. Sister Hong patted her on the shoulder. "It's time to get off work. You can take the materials back to read." Su-mu said goodbye to her and tidied up the things on the table. At this time, her cell phone rang. She looked at it and saw that it was Yi Xiangnan calling. In order to avoid suspicion, she picked up the phone and pretended to be cold. "What's the matter?" "It's nothing, I just wanted to ask you if you've thought it through. It's not too late for you to come crying and beg me," Yi Xiangnan said. Su-mu said softly, "No." Then she hung up. Xiaowen smiled and said, "Is that your husband? What's wrong? Did you quarrel? You don't look too good." Su-mu shook her head. Xiaowen saw that Su-mu was quite simple. In addition, she had become a mother at such a young age. Thinking that her financial situation wouldn't be good, she felt a little sympathetic. At this age, they didn't have enough moonlight and would ask their families for money. Xiaowen secretly said, "I overheard Sister Hong and the chief editor talking in the washroom. They said that they're going to hold a welcome party for you tomorrow. You should apply for leave from home tomorrow. Isn't that child very clingy to his mother?" Su-mu was surprised. Xiaowen said enviously, "I can see that Sister Hong likes and admires you a lot. She never cares about newcomers. You're the first. I just don't know if Du Meili from the entertainment section will attend." She whispered again, "Du Meili is the chief editor Zhang's, you know." As a newcomer, Su-mu couldn't say too much. She just smiled. When she left the newspaper office, the sky was a little dark. It was almost the beginning of winter. The weather was a little cold and it got dark early. She took the bus and arrived at the next stop. She didn't notice that a white Bentley had been following her all the time. She got off the bus and walked from here to her apartment. It took about 20 minutes. Actually, she could have taken 2 stops, but Su-mu wanted to walk after sitting for a whole day. Tomorrow afternoon, 20 chapters. I recommend Yao Yao's new book, She's Spoiled by the Paranoid Boss. Su Shuang's novel, the male lead is strong, and the female lead is explosive. Chapter 4999. Memorize. The streets were filled with neon lights. She walked slowly and realized that she hadn't been in such a state of mind for a long time. All these years, she had been busy earning money and taking care of Cymbidium chinense. Her life was actually quite tiring. It was rare for him to be so relaxed. Even the little lights on the street were flickering in an unusually cute manner. Su-mu quietly looked at the little lights. Her gaze suddenly paused and landed on a high-class restaurant by the roadside. Through the glass, she saw Shen Wenxuan. He was sitting face to face with a young and delicate woman. The woman was surrounded by elders, and Shen Wenxuan was surrounded by Shen Wenyuan. Beast City was so big, but she managed to see it. This must be the blind date that Yi Xiangnan told her about, Sumu stood there quietly, not moving her gaze away for a long time. Until the person behind the glass noticed her and turned to look at her. There was some confusion in Shen Wenxuan's eyes, as well as a trace of imperceptible pain. He said a few words to the people around him, then ran out and walked quickly to her. Together with her, standing in front of those twinkling little lights. As their eyes met, Sumu bitterly broke the silence. Blind date. Shen Wenxuan didn't deny it. He put his hands in his pockets and smiled faintly. Yes. What about you? I heard you went to work. Yes. I work in the newspaper office. After Sumu said that, she looked around the restaurant. Shen Wenyuan's gaze looked as if she was going to eat her up. She smiled, go back, they are still waiting for you. Shen Wenxuan stared at her. What about you? I'm going for a walk. Sumu smiled faintly. Go quickly. It's not good to leave a guest behind. Shen Wenxuan still left. In the restaurant, Shen Wenyuan naturally wouldn't say good things about Sumu. She said softly while cutting the high-class steak, she is Wenxian's former college classmate. Her style isn't very good. Before she graduated, she had an affair and got pregnant. I always told Wenxian not to date such a person. Wenxian felt pity for her. Our Wenxian is too soft-hearted. I heard that he sometimes helps her. What else can he do? He has a big business and is being coveted. The girl opposite was quite cultured. She opened her eyes wide. There is such a person. Then we must remind him to be careful. As she said that, she smiled shyly. Shen Wenyuan knew that the other party meant it. This was expected. Wenxian was excellent, gentle, and had a good character. Girls liked him very much. If he hadn't been waiting for Sumu, he would have gotten married and started a career long ago. Now, Wenxian finally understood. As long as he understood it, he could find any girl. She would rather die than fall in love with Sumu. She was skinny and not good-looking. She didn't know what Wenxian wanted from her. She also heard that her family was becoming more and more unreliable. Fortunately, that woman didn't hang out with Wenxian. Otherwise, how could she face her parents? When Shen Wenxuan came back, the girl chatted with him casually. Although her words were very polite, Shen Wenxuan could hear that she didn't agree with Sumu. Shen Wenxuan quietly looked at his sister. He didn't say anything, nor did he refuse the girl. He meant to continue dating. But later, he wasn't enthusiastic. This relationship, which couldn't be called a relationship, ended in a few months. It wasn't just because it faded, but because of Yi Hui's intervention. Chapter 5000. At this moment, Sumu watched Shen Wenxuan go in, and she slowly walked forward alone. However, the mood just now was gone, and it became a little heavy. After all, he was the person she liked when she was young. Even if it was unlikely that they would be together in the future, seeing him on a blind date always made her feel a little emotional. This feeling was the same as when he saw her and Yi Xiangnan together. Sumu raised her head and looked at those small lights, and a layer of mist floated in her eyes. At that time, he must have felt a little sad. Sometimes people were like this. They were still here, and they still liked each other. However, as time passed, things changed, and they could no longer be together. They also had a mutual affection before, and they had a tacit understanding to wait for each other, but when they found that their existence would bring pain to each other, the only choice was to let go. While Sumu was lost in thought, Yi Xiangnan had been sitting in the car. He had been watching her. Watching her suffer, watching her be sad for another man. This was a fatal blow to the arrogant CEO Yi. How was he inferior to Shen Wenxuan? If something happened between her and Shen Wenxuan, he could understand. It was just a small matter in school. Was it worth remembering until now? He and Qin Yihuan had been together for so many years, but didn't he let it go just like that? Yi Xiangnan put his hand on the edge of the car window and looked at Su Mu quietly. He wanted to see when she would notice him. But from beginning to end, Su Mu did not notice him. She only had Shen Wenxuan in her heart. Really, only Shen Wenxuan. Yi Xiangnan felt that he was a little cheap. He was too cheap. With Su Mu's looks, she was not even qualified to be the receptionist in his company. How could he not find fun and follow her outside? Yi Xiangnan thought and stepped on the accelerator. The white Bentley whizzed past Su Mu. Su Mu's eyes flashed and she looked over. She wasn't sure if she had seen Yi Xiangnan's car, but the license plate was really similar. Moreover, she heard that this Bentley was rare in B City. If it was Yi Xiangnan, would he be following her? What a pervert. Su Mu also diluted her sad mood. After returning home, she casually cooked a bowl of noodles for herself and ate while reading the information. The information given to her by Sister Hong was very useful and comprehensive. She was engrossed in it, and before she knew it, it was already 10:30 p.m. Half of the noodles were eaten, and the other half was already cold. Su Mu was not in the mood to eat anymore. She poured the noodles, washed the dishes, and went to the bathroom to take a shower. After drying her hair, she heard a knock on the door. She frowned. She couldn't think of anyone who would come looking for her at this time. Looking through the peephole, she was stunned. Yi Xiangnan. What was he doing here? She didn't want to open the door. She leaned against the door as if it could give her a sense of security. But she couldn't pretend to be there. Yi Xiangnan called her number, and the phone on the table rang. The soundproofing here wasn't good, and the people outside would definitely hear it. Su Mu went over to pick up the phone and said in a very low voice, Yi Xiangnan, what are you doing? Was the wine outside not good, or was the beauty not good looking? What was he doing here? Yi Xiangnan's voice was slightly hoarse. Open the door. Su Mu wouldn't open the door. She hung up and turned off the phone. She thought that if she ignored him and went to sleep, he wouldn't be able to do anything to her. But she really underestimated the shamelessness of President Yi. As soon as she returned to her room, her door was kicked violently by him, and the sound was loud. Chapter 5001. She was sure that people upstairs and downstairs could hear it. Su Mu didn't want to talk to him, but she couldn't ignore it. She still wanted to stay here. So she ran out, opened the door, and dragged Yi Xiangnan in. As soon as she came in, she smelled the alcohol on him. She frowned. Did you drink? Then how did he come here? Yi Xiangnan pressed Su Mu against the door like an eagle pouncing on a chick. He drank a little, but he wasn't drunk, but he was a little lazy. The way he looked at her was also a little resentful. Su Mu didn't know what she had done to offend him. Was it because of Shen Wenxuan? She bit her lower lip and argued, really, Yi Xiangnan, we can live a good life. There's no need to make ourselves so tired. After saying that, she pushed him and said, let me go. But that man didn't want to let her go at all. His expression became more lazy, and his hoarse voice was a little seductive. Mrs. Yi, aren't you going to ask me where I went last night? Su Mu couldn't stand his tone. She stretched out her foot and stepped on him. It wasn't a light step. Yi Xiangnan stepped aside and chuckled, you hate me so much. He went to the dining table, sat on the small dining room table, and stretched out his long arms and legs. "Make a bowl of noodles for me." As he spoke, he lit a cigarette and puffed on it. It was as if he treated this place as his own home. Sumu was speechless. She stared at him. "Yi Xiangnan. Go home." "I drank." "You want me to drink and drive?" he asked. He blew out a smoke ring, which happened to spray on Sumu's face. Sumu avoided it, but she was still choked. Yi Xiannan let out a low chuckle and grabbed Yan's wrist with the hand she was holding. Sumu was afraid that the cigarette would burn her, so she didn't dare to struggle. She was pulled over in a very intimate posture. "You showered." He smelled her hair and thought it smelled good. She was quite thin, so it would be nice to hold her. Sumu couldn't resist him at all. She broke free and glared at him. "Yi Xiangnan, what on earth do you want to do?" He smiled and asked slowly, "What do you want me to do?" Sumu was still glaring at him. He smiled and said, "Go cook me a bowl of noodles. You can leave after you finish eating." She looked as if there was no room for discussion. Yi Xiangnan smiled. "Look at you. You can't forget about Shenwen Xian, but you're so cruel to me. Sumu, you're such a double standard. Besides, I'm your legal husband." Sumu glared at him. Yi Xiangnan smiled faintly. "Go cook some noodles. I'm hungry." He hadn't eaten dinner yet. After drinking 2 glasses of wine, he really wasn't in the mood to come over. He also didn't like this place, but Sumu was here, so he had no choice. Sumu glared at him for a long time. He stretched his long arms and legs, looking like he was asking for it. She was so angry that she went to cook the noodles, begging him to leave after he finished eating. Sumu's cooking skills were actually not bad. The simple noodles were also fragrant. Yi Xiangnan ate half of it and lit a cigarette. Sumu opened the window a little. "Can you not smoke here in the future?" After she said that, he looked at her with a slightly clear gaze. Sumu pursed her lips. "Why are you looking at me like that?" "You said in the future." Yi Xiangnan didn't eat much. He pushed the bowl of noodles away and directly puffed out the smoke. Knowing that she didn't like it, he opened the window. After a day of meetings, he was addicted to smoking. Chapter 5002. When the window is opened, the cool air outside penetrates in at once. Sumu sneezes. Yi Xiannan put out the cigarette and closed the window. Too weak to stand up to the wind. He looked around again and complained, "For bare walls. Sumu doesn't feel inferior. No one asked you to come. You can go now." Yi Xiangnan takes a cigarette and plays with it in his hand, but he doesn't light it. He looks at her and says with a smile, "It's Mrs. Ye's right not to ask about what happened last night." He seems to think of something. "Of course, I also caught your weakness today. Sumu, we're even." Sumu says without thinking, "How can it be the same?" After saying that, she regrets it and wants to bite off her tongue. Yi Xiangnan's eyes are shining. Sumu doesn't say anything. She leans against the wall and looks a little tired. Yi Xiangnan picks up the stack of documents on the table. "You still read this when you come back. Sumu, do you have to work so hard? You don't want to be Mrs. Yi. Why do you have to be a professional woman? Tell me how much money you make a month. I'll pay you 10 times. Just make Cymbidium Chinense happy at home." He is discriminating against women. Sumu doesn't want to talk to him about this. Yi Xiannan, on the other hand, looked at Sumu carefully after reading a few pages. Do you really know that this industry is dangerous? Do you really know that it's a certain risk? Sumu purses her lips. Someone has to do it. This job. Without waiting for her to finish, Yi Xiannan placed the documents on the table and said in a slightly cold voice, "It's not as promising as being a paparazzi. That sure something is doing pretty well. In the future, when I send you a message, just write it directly." Sumu felt insulted by him. Was she the kind of person who would go through the back door? Moreover, the paparazzi really insulted her. Sumu tidied up the documents. "When are you leaving?" "Did I say I'm leaving?" he said shamelessly. "And Sumu, we haven't finished our discussion yet." She didn't appreciate it. "There's no need to discuss it." "Yi Xiangnan, I've said that our certificate," he stared at her. Sumu suddenly couldn't go on. She felt a sense of helplessness. After a while, she said tiredly, "I've worked for a whole day. I'm tired. Can you let me rest?" Yi Xiangnan continued to stare at her. After a moment, he said bitterly, "It's because of Shen Wenxuan that you're tired. That's why you don't want me here. Do you want to reminisce about the past, the beautiful past you had with him? It has nothing to do with you." Sumu rubbed her forehead helplessly. "Yi Xiangnan, how many times do you want me to say it? If I say that I really want to marry you and be an ordinary husband and wife, are these not attractive to you at all?" he asked her quietly. When he said this, there wasn't much expression on his face. He seemed to be serious. Sumu was stunned. Yi Xiangnan stood up at this moment. As he walked outside, he lit a cigarette. "You don't have to answer. I know your answer." With that said, he opened the door and walked out. There was still a trace of cigarette smell in the air. He had just lit it. Sumu licked her lower lip. She couldn't believe that he had left just like that. Would Yi Xiangnan be so kind? She sat for a long time before she finally got up. She walked to the door. She should have locked the door, but for some reason, she wanted to look outside. The door opened. Her body was caught and then pressed against the dark gray wall. Chapter 5003. The walls were old, full of dust, and there was a faint moldy smell. Usually, young Master Yi would pay attention to the environment and atmosphere, but at this moment, he couldn't care less. Yi Xiangnan pressed his forehead against hers, his voice extremely hoarse. "How could I, like, such an ordinary woman like you?" With that, he kicked the door open. That night, he domineeringly forbade her to think about Shen Wenxuan. She was his wife, and she was not allowed to think about other men going on blind dates, let alone be sad. Late at night, Sumu leaned on his shoulder, lost in thought. She was thinking about her relationship with Yi Xiangnan now. She kept saying that their marriage certificate was just a piece of paper, but she knew that they were already together. They were just short of moving to another place. If they weren't together at his place, they would be together at her place. She turned over. Yi Xiangnan didn't sleep either, his voice indifferent. "What are you thinking about?" Sumu swallowed the words that were about to come out. She wanted to give in, but her pride didn't want to. In the end, she didn't say anything and fell asleep in his arms. Yi Xiangnan lowered his head and smiled faintly. He wasn't used to the small bed, but the smell of Sumu's hair was quite nice. After lying there quietly for half an hour, he finally fell asleep. At dawn, they got up like an old couple. Sumu made 2 sets of breakfast. Yi Xiangnan wasn't picky, but his expensive clothes didn't fit in here. Especially when Sumu made breakfast for him, he felt like a waiter in a small restaurant. Young Master Ye's appearance, clothes, and taste were all top-notch. She didn't seem to match him standing next to her. Yi Xiangnan didn't care. After breakfast, he said indifferently, "Can I help you move things tonight?" It was rare for him to be so accommodating. He could let others do these things, but because some things were personal and she was his wife, he didn't want others to do it. Su Mu looked at him for a while and refused. "I'm fine living here." Yi Xiangnan frowned. "Then what do you take me for?" "A free one-man show. It's easy to use and it's on call." "I didn't call you. You came by yourself." After Su Mu said that, she felt that her words were quite bad. Last night, she did have a momentary impulse to become a couple with him, but now that she had calmed down, they were indeed not suitable for each other. Thus, she retreated. She thought that he was probably stimulated by the novelty, so he had to get his hands on her and make her behave. Actually, wasn't this good? Although it wasn't as bad as he said, it was good for them to be like this. No one needed to take responsibility. He was an adult, and he had a certificate. It was pretty good. Su Mu's expression showed what she meant. Yi Xiangnan was a little ashamed and angry. Yes, young Master Yi was ashamed and resentful. He had always taken pleasure in others. Since when did a woman ignore him like this? He stared at her coldly. "You're really open-minded, Mrs. Yi." "Don't call me that." She ate the omelette in small bites. "Isn't it more convenient for you to stay single?" He couldn't take it anymore. "I've said it before. I didn't do anything the night before. It was just what was in the photo. Doesn't that constitute cheating?" Su Mu said softly, "I said a few words to Shen Wenxuan, and you were like that. You hugged with a woman in the bar and drank together. You could make me a cuckold at any time. I think it's good for us to be like this." You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.